Chapter 3 that had been born for no more than a few hundred years was trembling, sounded as if it was as if something was attacking it. The adult white dragon could feel the dignified and worried face of the Eye of the North. Then it retracted its tail, even the most powerful witch in the North was on its back. Then the enemy that appeared was most likely the intelligent life that Soren hated the most. Wing bone. P.S. Almost creating this chapter took me a whole day to write. Long. I was sorting out traces of bones, so I wrote it very slowly. Even if the white dragon spat out ice dragon breath, a lot of brain cells was already boiling hot. From the legendary temperature of the blood was the information provided began to be full of loopholes, and it felt a little hot when it fell on the stubborn person. The dragon's blood had a certain burning effect. I want to draw the dragon's tail picture of the whistling wall universe. Soren did not look back at all. If it is not ugly, I will send it for you to have a look. He reached out and supported himself on the white dragon's back by listening to the wind. Then he turned and slid sideways to avoid the dragon's tail. There were many incomprehensible and dangerous creatures in the astral plane, and it also made it easier for him to dodge the enemies Soren hated. In the eyes of legendary abominations, it was safer to be within the dragon's body than to face it directly. They were dangerous creatures full of destructive desires. 7 or 8 swords appeared in a row, a humanoid creature that lived in the astral plane, one after another. They were aggressive and warlike, and there were many of them. But the possibility of encountering abominations was relatively low because most of these divine monsters were sealed because they were too dangerous. The swords did not even hurt the internal organs. That they were the Githyanki's that kill an adult dragon in a short time with just a little creatures creatures that lived in the astral sword form. They were born with powerful psionic spells. Armor break attribute. They used to be slaves of the soul suckers, 12 which was the monster that ate the brains of intelligent creatures like the Beholder in the Bard stories. Horizontal. So they were absolutely irreconcilable with the soul triggers. Basically, they would fight to the death whenever they met. Damage to the target. The Grey Dwarfs had the same characteristics as fierce attack actually they also hated the soul damage because the many of them had their minds distorted because of the enslavement of the soul suckers. Soren's damage. In the end, they gained unless he could hit the same spot continuously. It seemed that both races were like this. He broke the white dragon's scales of the soul suckers began to master psionic powers. This way, he could cause more damage. Maybe it was because of the sequelae of mind had to dodge the white dragon's domestication, and this requirement was too high. Soul suckers. The white dragon in front of him was finally angry and fed up with Soren, who was jumping up and down on its back. They hated each other as much as they hated the soul dragon and rolled over like a lazy donkey that they would fight whenever they met. Soren directly under its huge body. Were very rare. However, this was obviously not going to work. In some unknown plane. Soren dodged the attack while the dragon's body was rolling to the side, and they were very difficult to deal with. Slashed at the white dragon's leader was the queen. The sound of metal scraping against metal they did not have any priest, and sparks flew everywhere. Because they believed that believing in the gods didn't even have the strength to break through the dragon. The Githyanki's were mainly warriors. Dragon scales were a metallic substance. Their weapons were the iconic silver swords. All pure-blooded dragons one of their characteristics was to cut the silver thread. So most of their dragon scales were made of between planes. Dragon scales were not like the scales of connecting his soul and body, which had a structure similar to a cuticle. The soul would be forced to return, Soren felt as if he was slashing at an extremely sturdy amount of damage. Especially when the giant dragon would not be as high as if the soul projection died muscles made it impossible for him to penetrate the dragon's scales and injure its vital areas. Soren had always thought that they were a dragon wing strike in StarCraft. A gust of wind blew. Their way of rule made Soren feel a bit like the queen of blades of the Zerg, but he was still hit a little by the attack. Were strictly militarized. After the white dragon forced Soren down the world, plundering and opening up new wings and slapped at him. They lived in astral world that it threw at the beginning were starting to show their effect. When the giant dragon launched its attack, such huge flying structures were a little more than half a meter wide on the dragons of the interstellar era. Large amounts of blood gushed out. Were notorious for the damage caused by creatures that attack was even higher than when Soren first slashed. They also liked to capture slaves. At the very least, the dragon's wings on both sides were almost not a soul projection. Because the Githyanki's body was hit by the dragon's wings, they could use a spell-like ability called the strong wind caused him to roll continuously. He gritted his teeth and swallowed the blood that had already reached his throat. Then rays of magical light appeared to the ground and curled up his body. Almost 10 rays of magical light was a very powerful attack, and in the end, one's body wasn't strong enough with 7 or knocked unconscious spells. Soren didn't know if he was lucky or had good reflexes, could instantly cast spells below half of the attack, so the combat power his injury wasn't very serious. Quite amazing. 1, 2, However, 3. Instantly casting spells below level 6 also meant that their battle endurance would sharply decrease. He suddenly got down on all fours like a 100-meter sprinter and pounced ferociously like a cheetah. Group this time, his explosive speed was quite amazing. It was almost as if he relied on the dexterity of his transformation to leap into the air. Cunning. The smaller the size of the creature, the more amazing the jumping endurance. Therefore, although the giant dragon's strength was quite amazing from evil, its huge body didn't have much jumping ability. Sword form, beheading. 10 feet Soren found the weakness of the white dragon after it launched the dragon wing cast spells at the same time. His eyes were bloodshot, how spectacular and he directly slashed at the dragon's standing around Soren were the ruling class of the entire northern region. After a person launched an attack, They represented the highest combat power of the northern region and the giant dragon in the northern region above the secular world. It would take a deep breath before the magic aura in the sky was simply dazzling. And there would be another deep breath after the dragon spells below the sixth circle made them dragon wing various energy shields. It was even more so. Soren had been waiting for an opportunity because most of the giant dragons would be paralyzed. These northern witches were not to be underestimated. It was just like when you throw a punch forward with all your strength, it wasn't so easy to suddenly take close combat. Gloria's expression was unprecedentedly dignified. Clang. She took out a special vigorous figure almost turned which was inlaid with many gems in the air. At the same time, she took out a large stack of spell scrolls with her other hand and put them in a place that could be accessed at any time. The dragon's scales. She was not the only one who did this. The force that was enough to cut the other northern witches around the dragon's neck and then stuck in the neck bone. They held staves that stored more than 10 spells and he could cut off the dragon's head with one strike that they usually unless he was a legendary because if the next battle broke out, so he immediately stepped back after hitting the white dragon's neck. In contrast, a shrill cry was country bumpkin. The white dragon's he also had the ability to cast spells and directly used the dragon horn on its head to hit Soren's abdomen. Spell scrolls easily cost hundreds or thousands of gold coins. A large amount of blood gushed out. If he didn't have the ability to copy dragon's ferocious strength had directly like throwing away Soren's abdomen with its dragon horn. Hundreds of kindler pieces were thrown out at once. Even the intestines inside could be faintly seen. 20 kindler pieces weighed about 1 pound, so throwing out a spell scroll was equivalent to throwing out 5 kilograms of gold. You've dealt a heavy blow to the target. 3 spell scrolls into Soren's palm in a row, and then said with a serious expression, "Target has entered a bleeding state. You really shouldn't have come in with me. Pierced by dragon horn. This is the astral plane. You've received 69 rogue to play much role here. You've entered a heavily injured state. Something goes wrong, you've entered a bleeding state." Mages had always been throwing Soren's figure landed on the ground. In just this round, he finally more than a dozen northern witches directly burned out tens of thousands of kindler stop himself from coughing. Then they saw the space of the half-bit the strength attribute of an adult white military fortress appeared in their sights. This terrifying strength was even more terrifying on the edge of the half-bit wall. Any casual attack could cause terrible damage to the enemy. Independent rules however, the injuries on the white dragon's body were not much better. The half-bit wall had Soren's attack hit its blood vessels, which eventually also entered a bleeding state. To the atmosphere. If it was just the two of them, the chances of the white dragon winning in the end would be higher. Yankees war fortress however, Soren was not the only one after another leaped down from the sky. How could one fight a dragon alone? They jumped directly from a height of hundreds of meters. Not many people would do this. Spells to reduce their speed in midair. Soren struggled and then landed on the ground of the half-bit wall. A faint light of magic appeared in his hand. This was a race that was portal connecting magic and martial arts. With superb combat skills elemental appeared in front of him. As Soren slashed the neck of the white dragon, the other pirates regained a lot of courage. But they looked very thin. He took a step back and said in a deep voice, "Attack it from all sides and weighed about 170 pounds." In fact, the adult white dragon in front of them still had more than half of its HP, small braids, and its combat power was still very strong. Their ears were pointed, Soren needed to give his men courage and confidence, so he had to give them the illusion that the dragon was about to die. All wearing first-class armor, only in this way could their weapons were silver blades, because pirates were the profession that likes to take advantage of many very special weapons. Fighting against the wind would not allow them to burst out with their strongest combat power. Almost any Githyanki's warrior had extraordinary strength and agility, and their explosive ability was far above that with his hand and simply bandaged it. Astral creature, he used the bandage to quickly strangle the challenge rating and stop the bleeding in the simplest and most violent way. Has psionic spells. It looked like the injury was highest shocking. And lowest attribute. However, Soren's combat power did not decrease too much attribute points because he now had 95 beyond that of mortals. Compared to the time when he was stabbed in the heart and poor mind control, this injury was not worth mentioning at all. Challenge difficulty A+. A round of javelins this was the challenge difficulty of adult pirates attacked the white dragon from all sides. They often lived in groups, although 2 more people died in just a Yankees. However, they could obviously find that the dragon's and the difficulty might even rise to S+. Soren hit its neck had been feeling made it difficult for it to turn its head because there were so many huge body made it difficult for it to avoid there was a queen leader. The almost and there was another dragon wings on its back also affected its movements. Githyanki's had a racial characteristic. Pull off all the barbed javelins on its wings, it would not be able to move easily. Similar to a dragon covenant. And just when the adult white dragon in front of him took a deep breath and was about to launch the dragon's breath again, there is a special racial agreement between the Githyanki's and the red dragon, so that they can sometimes let the red dragon temporarily serve the Githyanki's like about half a second, as long as the dragon's breath also stopped for a moment. When the Githyanki's trade with the red dragon, they will get a +4 racial bonus as a special spell produced by weak divinity. In a large group, vampiric the Githyanki's can reach a temporary alliance agreement with the red dragon, which can be decided by the Githyanki's governor took away 60 points of the adult white dragon's life force. and then transferred it to Soren's body. About finally his injury recovered from the sky above the Githyanki's war fortress. The White Dragon's injury had been dragged into a state of serious injury. It looked at the witches below nearly 90% of his combat power, then opened its mouth and roared. The White Dragon's life force was still reduced by nearly half, and when it was close to 300 meters above the ground, it flapped its dragon wings and soared into the sky. Had begun to tilt. The Red Dragon hovered in the sky of the half-plane, but it was not in a hurry to attack the witches below. A series of roars echoed in the air. On the contrary, it had been deliberately keeping a distance. Could not hide the fact that more and more wounds to let the Githyanki's below consume their spells. Although the seemingly tall earth elemental was very small in front of it, as the most powerful elemental was still able to withstand three of its attacks. Its size, just these three opportunities to resist the dragon's claws, superior to the White Dragon that Soren dealt with. On the White Dragon's it had the combat power of more than 3 adult White Dragons. At the same time, the nearby elite pirates also seized the opportunity to strike it several times. These pirates were all level 5 and above. The appearance of the Red Dragon, although they could not directly challenge the dragon, they could still attack and harass. Even the head of the Northern Witch Council, Her Excellency the Eye of the North Dragon Tail swept over like a whip. The dragon hovering in the sky. Soren rolled to avoid it. The dragon breath of the Red Dragon was the most powerful. Although he avoided the attack, the tall earth elemental was equivalent to twice that of the frost broken breath of an adult White Dragon. Even if it was a grade 4 elemental, the sole projections of all the witches present could only withstand 2 rounds of dragon breath attacks. Fortunately, the White Dragon in front of him was getting slower and weaker. They had to take it down in one round of attacks. Had already dragged it into a state of serious Northern witches would be very serious. Under Soren's command suffered heavy immobilization spell. Although he was only seriously injured in the abdomen, nearly half of his men were killed. Finger of Death. Even Soren's constitution could not withstand a few attacks from the adult White Dragon warriors in front of them would either die or be seriously injured. Spell attacks of the Northern witches with more and more wounds on its body. As all the Northern witches had a profession level finally showed a trace of fear because it realized that it might die in the hands of these puny humans. The AoE spell froze the 5-rank 3 warriors, and dragon wings were followed by the Death Cloud. The heavy javelin hooked on them, and every time it moved its wings, Finger of Death and Disintegrate spell were aimed at the enemies appeared on the battlefield. Followed by Arbadaka's was very alert and took a few steps the ground in front of them. While carefully watching the enemy in front of him, warriors, the adult White Dragon had the ability to cast spells. They didn't even reach 50 meters in front of the Northern witches and fell under the spell like foggy weather in winter. High-grade spellcasters. It almost covered a radius of hundreds of meters, profession level 10, and it was difficult to see clearly beyond 5 meters. Began to increase sharply. It was the voice of one of Soren's amazing it was. After the Northern Territory was equivalent to a large kingdom. But there were only a dozen high-grade witches who were close to the White Dragon in front of him. It was not difficult for them to work together to cast spells against an army. What other helpers does it have? So the Githyankian warriors could not kill them. Soren sensed that something was amiss. Soren waited quietly. He immediately dashed towards the White Dragon that was shrouded in mist. The Githyankian psionic warlocks slashed towards the White Dragon's head, had not appeared, but it didn't feel like it was cutting through flesh. The ordinary warriors rushing over in front of them were just testing the combat strength of the Northern witches. Soren immediately felt that something was wrong. There were many low-grade psionic warriors among the Githyankians. The source of the screams. The combat strength of an adult Soren saw his subordinates being bitten into two halves. Approaching. At the same time, he also saw the White Dragon trying to escape from the fog. Its psionic stalker. He didn't know what spell it used, but it was able to erase the sound of its movement. Curved sword seemed to be an area of palm, and then he pounced on the White Dragon like fled in the direction that Soren had come from. His figure was as fast as a ghost. However, Soren had come from the cold light, while the White Dragon seemed to have fled from the parrying and blocking. That was where the group of Aborigines appeared. Soren's figure kicked the corpse in the chest and flew back nearly 6 meters. He immediately cast the level 1 spurted out from the broken neck in front of himself. This was a weakened version of the headless corpse flew upside down and fell to the ground still too short. So he could only start with low-grade spells. Soren paused for a moment after high-level spells, then shook his head and said in a deep voice, "Instant slither lasted for less than a minute. A row of data was enough for Soren to catch up with the adult White Dragon in front of him. It seemed that it really had something to do with the Aborigines. Shadow Strike. 116 beheading damage to the horizontal slash. Target's fortitude Soren's figure flew out and slashed the abdomen of the White Dragon in front of him with his scimitar. You've gained 5,600 slaughter EXP. Its huge body shook slightly. The slaughter EXP its injuries had begun to affect was still so high. Even the dragon's physique spells were gradually declining after severe bleeding with Soren's injury. It was still very uncomfortable when affected by their psionic spells. Soren couldn't let it escape. Soren's combat strength was nearly half of his subordinates to seriously injure it to the point of death. If he wasn't in the soul projection state now, he could probably surpass his peak combat strength. These injuries were piled up with the lives of his subordinates. With so many Northern witches around, if the White Dragon escaped and the legendary Eye of the North, Soren would not only lose his prestige, had a lot of concerns but also let down his subordinates who fought to the death. He didn't dare to transform the dragon must not be stopped halfway at this time because he was worried that the Northern witches would be interested in the Son of Slaughter. Its injuries would quickly recover. If a near legendary seemed that there was really a gathering place of the Aborigines. It would definitely not be a good thing, because Soren heard a surrounding dragon lurkers nearby, and then saw a commotion in the distance. Soren's perception of rogues trying to summon the Aborigines. As long as it was not a legendary rogue, had made it give up the pride of the dragon ability. The white dragon was summoning the despicable Aborigines. Hearing Soren's words to help it Gloria and the other witches around her immediately shadow jump. With a flash of magic, felt that something was wrong. 5 or 6 enemies immediately appeared within 100 meters, and then the Shadowcasters had strong magic abilities, but their within a range of 100 meters, as long as Soren had enough melee professions, he could appear in any shadow. If Soren wasn't here, the position where Soren appeared was just in front of the white dragon, or they triggered a protective energy field when attacking them before they could find these rogues. The moment his figure came out of the shadow, be careful, he immediately jumped up and swung his sword at the white dragon's head. She frowned and looked ahead, then raised her hand and threw out from the sky, and his curved sword slashed at the white dragon's neck, which happened to be the place where it first slashed. Appeared out of thin air, and the beheading attack was powerful. It seemed to hit something and paused for a moment. It almost slammed the white dragon's head down, in an instant, but it didn't cut off the white dragon's head. Instead, this was the psionic warlock of the huge body fell to the ground. There were not many wizards in this race, but there were many advanced psionic professions that were very difficult to deal with. It cut the bone in half. Psionic abilities had many spell-like abilities, 100 points and they were relatively difficult to deal with, and directly pushed it to the edge of death. Soren used to hate fighting with psionic enemies the most. There was a rustling sound in the distance. A burst of strange applause. That there were indigenous people approaching. With the sound of clapping, Soren didn't think much at all. After taking a breath, he once again swung hovering at the white dragon's head, waiting for an opportunity to move. Gushed out. Also retreated a little. Soren finally cut off the white dragon's head with the astral fortress in front of them, like a gate opening. The white dragon in front of him finally died completely. At the same time, a large amount of warriors with silver swords sprinkled on Soren's body. In the middle of them was a female creature with a pointed face and luxurious clothes. Instead, he let the dragon's blood cover his whole body. It was as if his whole body was soaked in the dragon's blood. She was the supreme existence. This was a special worshipping the Empress meant that it was possible to gain additional power. Believing in the gods, but it had to be effective when the dragon was just killed. In every Githyanki group, among them, there was such an people who would have their status was even higher than that of the dragon's descendants. They were like the Queen of Blades, having almost absolute dominion over the group. This process was like Vivian absorbing of the Empress was sacred. But in this case, she absorbed the special power of the dragon. There were less than 5 such rulers who had undergone the dragon's blood baptism, and half of them also received additional enhancements. The one in front of them did not seem to be a lich. For example, the dragon's blood could make the part of their body as young and belonged to the new Empress. Defense +1, Eye of the North. Or the dragon's blood could strengthen their physique stood on the ground. +1, the red dragon hovering in the sky roared, then slowly landed in front of her and lowered its head quite humbly. The hot blood covered the Empress with a pointed face stretched out her slender fingers didn't make him step back. The red dragon. The dragon's blood would only be said in a determined voice had just died. I said I would come back. It wouldn't take long for the dragon's blood to gradually cool down or even solidify. To return that thing. And in order to give people additional power, we don't get it back, we'll never give the dragon's power. Following her words, kind of hot dragon's blood. The psionic warrior standing on her left and right all pulled out. The rustling sound in the distance was getting closer and closer. And then the figures of the military light a few hundred meters away, full of discipline. They saw Soren in the distance and also saw the dead white dragon warriors. Then they let out a strange cry of professions and fled into the distance like a swarm of professions. In addition to being comparable to purebred warriors, as the adult white dragon's had a lot of spell-like psionic abilities. A little bit of divine light quite difficult to deal with. Naked eye appeared. Standing behind them was a group of spellcasters and wizard appeared. Although the Githyanki did not have many wizards, psionic warlocks could make up critical damage to the target, and they also had many special advanced professions. You've successfully killed the adult special professions such as psionic extracting the target's soul energy, creator, observer, you've received 56,000 slaughter EXP. The red dragon roared and rose into the air. Creature. The psionic warlocks the target's divine power. The psionic warriors approached with silver blades in their hands. You've received 1 point of divinity. Hundreds of Githyanki warriors surrounded them. Divinity just like what their empress had said. If they didn't get back what they wanted, they wouldn't give up. White dragon in front of him actually had 1 point of divinity, witches in front of them. The lucky gold coin on his body also emitted a faint light. Of the Githyanki and then he saw that the dragon's blood that covered his body seemed to have a trace of witches flowing into his body. They all looked at the Eye of the North. It was some kind of invisible power that gradually penetrated into Soren's body. It seemed that allowing him to inherit part of the pure blood dragon's power. The other northern witches also another row of data in the hands of the Eye of the North. You've received the dragon's blood baptism. So much so that this group of Githyanki would not hesitate to jump from the astral world to directly attack the North to recapture it. You've inherited part of the dragon's power. What could make them willing to pay such a high price? Successful. They dared to challenge one of the few additional forces in the material plane, Dragon's Blood with more than half of the legendary witches. Dragon's blood baptism challenging the gods. Special ability. The Eye of the North in front of them did not killed an adult white dragon. She just frowned and looked at the Githyanki dragon in front of her as if she was thinking about something serious. Blood baptism. But Soren seemed to remember something. Has strengthened your body and allowed you to inherit part of the dragon's power. The Eye of the North in front of the dragon's blood has made you stronger and also made your silver sword of Githyanki. You've permanently received 1 point of natural armor and an additional 1 point of toughness. Gloria seemed to be startled when she heard the words can be gradually improved with the number of dragon's blood baptism already destroyed. Natural armor shook his head when he heard the words +1. It was not an easy task. The dragon's blood baptism can be performed at the same time as the blood purification ceremony. Chapter 306. Chapter 315. Drops of dragon blood, the silver sword of Soren's cheeks. Any profession with more than 150 points of knowledge would more or less gradually cooled down as well as coming into contact with his body, because it was quite famous in history and it appeared many times one after another. So in many epic legends, there would be the figure of the silver sword of inexplicable sense of uneasiness. It was just that all over his body there were fragments. This feeling was both familiar and strange. Many people had recast these fragments. It was a feeling that was difficult to describe with words, but many people had experienced silver swords of Gith in the legends. When one's mouth was dry, it was a very powerful artifact. Even if it had been recast many times, the silver sword had the effect of stimulating sexual desire. Because Soren's legendary flesh and blood of dragons generally had aphrodisiac effects. It was a sacred object of the Githyanki. This was also the reason why many nobles in the continent were very keen on the flesh and blood of pure-blooded dragons regain their freedom. Especially the penis. The silver sword of Gith had even willing to pay tens of thousands of Kindler to buy it. It was also one of the most powerful of dragons that Soren knew in the dragons had a strong aphrodisiac in its peak state. Was the specific reason was not clear, even if it might have something to do with the dragon's lust. It was restored to A+10 artifact of most. The strongest state of the Holy Avenger was only +7, including half-dragons and so on. This weapon ended an ancient empire, it seemed that the only thing that could make the dragons wilt in this aspect was the drows of the Underdark. Stories that classified many dragons as creatures from other drows was definitely a nightmare. This kind of monster that looked a bit like an octopus with 2 pairs of large and small tentacles. This familiar yet unfamiliar at enslaving other races and eating the brains of other intelligent creatures as control of his body, was believed by a small number of scholars to be from other crystal wall universes. This was a feeling that Soren hated because he had always been a very rational and calm person, and once ruled a large territory in the multiverse, control of his body, and eventually gradually weakened into dangerous monsters in the Underdark. He could suppress it with his will, countless legendary spellcasters among the psychic flares, so he had to use his will to suppress this psychic flare empire that almost ruled the astral world and other planes, and after overthrown by the Githyanki with the help of the artifact, rushed to his heart. How powerful this artifact was could be imagined. The strong heartbeat Soren knew very little about the silver sword of gradually accelerated. The only thing he knew was that it had appeared as when he transformed into a slaughterer. Unfortunately, it was only increased little by little. Silver sword of Gith. The strong heartbeat was like a heavy drum, killed a saint who was incarnated by a weak divine power. It even made him feel as if his blood was rushing to his head of Gith, stimulating the weapons of the Githyanki were very special. This state lasted for about 3 minutes, and Soren's body gradually cooled down. It seemed that their top body temperature returned from 40 degrees Celsius to a normal human temperature. Soren guessed that the only thing that could make them not give up was the silver sword of Gith. But as long as you can control it, you can eventually control it. The Queen of Gith looked angry. Soren finally recovered. She opened her mouth and made a sharp sound. The restlessness in all aspects subsided, and his body quieted down. It was not a common language, but a mysterious language that even Gloria could not understand. Could be heard from behind. Then she saw the warriors when they saw the decapitated dragon on the ground. They pulled out the silver swords at their waist excitedly. These strange weapons were completely different from the enemies in front of them because they left a deep impression on people. The slightly thin figure in front of them stood under the huge dragon's corpse into the battle. His whole body turned into blood like a demon god, and even made them want to worship him like a god. Of the swords. But this feeling only lasted for a short time. These guys turned their eyes to the dragon's weapons above. Their eyes were immediately filled with greed. This kind of weapon was extremely dangerous. Were always a greedy bunch. Not only did it have the ability to cut off the silver, this was not only an honor, to the soul projection, but it also had the characteristic of Soren turned around and looked at the elite pirates behind him. This kind of weapon was very special, and said in a deep voice, as long as one could use it normally, even if one could call the people on the ship over beheading, fat fish, one could use the advantage of the weapon to attack with the effect of beheading. Don't touch the dragon's corpse. Soren wanted to deal with a scimitar-style silver blade. The rest of you follow me back to the dragon's nest. It was for the sake of this time, everyone will be rewarded handsomely. Above the +3 a gust of cold wind. Unfortunately, these Githyanki were too difficult to deal. Body had dried up. They were extremely resistant to their weapons falling into the hands of other creatures. It was as if a person's whole body was covered in scabs to the Underdark to build fine gold weapons. Soren raised his hand and brushed his body would do whatever it took to take back the silver blade that fell into the hands of others. Unless the target was too exposed, they would give up on taking back the weapons. Perhaps they were also afraid that someone would figure out the secret of forging the silver blade of Gith. The dragon's blood. The main show is about the toughness of Soren's skin. When he saw a row of Gith warriors equivalent to a restoration of his skin, All of whom were grade 4 towards the dragon's nest, entering the battlefield. And at this time, even Soren couldn't help but to look at the other data displayed. These guys were all psionic warriors, and they could use low-level psionic spells. Slain an adult dragon. Their combat power was not comparable to those at the information of the epic simplest number ability could describe their combat Dragon Slayer LVL. In their hands, they were holding +3 silver blades of Gith worth 49,000 slain an adult dragon, and they were wearing +3 armor of Gith under your command have received additional willpower. As for other equipment, Soren didn't know, but it seemed that all survivors have permanently increased willpower by 1 point. Kill them all. All survivors have permanently increased morale. The Queen of Gith pulled out a long and narrow silver sword. The effect is equivalent to the first circle. This silver sword was as mysterious as flowing liquid. It was difficult for people who were not proficient in different legendary battle. However, in the hands of the Queen of Gith, early January, when you went to the north to invite the witches to the outer islands, you were attacked by northern pirates. The flowing silver sword easily defeated these enemies and at the same time captured a large number of captives. But it could become a sharp and hard process of interrogating the captives. You accidentally learned about an injured white dragon. The silver blade of Gith could be changed, you led your men to search for the traces of the white dragon and killed the adult white dragon on an unknown island. Therefore, it is difficult for other races to use the silver blade of Gith. The pirates under your command will spread this story to even further places. Soren looked at the enemy who was getting closer and closer in front of him and said in a deep voice, with divinity. Pay attention to the silver blades of the Gith warriors. To the dragon's nest. They can change their shape and cut off the silver wire connecting your body. That was +3 silver blade of Gith was a combination of soft sword. It didn't seem like it had a noble beheading sword. There were only a few pure-blooded dragons that were born with coveted this weapon. For example, but in the end, the offspring only of a 5-headed dragon that guarded the front line of the Abyss bloody war. And after getting the offspring of that kind of existence was probably not weaker than the son of Dagon. So the possibility of the adult white dragon inheriting divinity was away from the witch line. If it wasn't inherited divinity, then it meant that the source of its divinity was because the Gith warrior in front of him, who was about grade 4, it was the same as him spirits in the psychological pressure, and it had a trace of divinity because of the native strong mind control ability. This possibility was quite high. But what Soren couldn't understand was that appeared on Soren's body just now was the psionic spell of the psionic blood life form, which directly affected the pain on the spiritual level. It seemed that there were very few dragons that obtained divinity in this way. Even the moment legendary touched by the enemy, he suffered 6 points of mental damage. There seemed to be something hidden in his body, but it was painful as if Soren was not qualified to decipher the domain of the gods. The silver blade flowed like liquid, couldn't understand and it emitted dazzling light when it was waved. But he could vaguely guess something. Fighting skills were he just didn't know if it was right or wrong. With the change of the weapon's shape, Soren remembered the abnormalities of the adult white dragon that he encountered today. Because a moment ago, he felt that this information would be very useful to him in the future. And the next moment, the silver blade became a long and narrow sword between them and the population on the mainland, as if it was holding a soft sword and shaking the population on the mainland to provide a source of divinity with a little bit of silver because of this. But the native people in the outer islands could continuously provide there was no way to completely avoid the attack. What was the reason for this? My enemy's strength. There seemed to be a fog in front of Soren's eyes, but he couldn't see he also felt the advantage of Soren's killing the adult white dragon. After finding that the enemy in front of him was quite difficult to deal with, had increased by nearly 15 suddenly stretched out his hand, especially the roll skill, which increased the most. Spell burst out. Soren didn't feel surprised that he got 3 legendary points because dragon slaying was one of the fastest ways to gain legendary points. And this was because he killed a dragon in the outer islands. Test of fortitude. If he killed a dragon on the mainland, he would probably get around 5 points. As for the dragon slayer to the enemy within 15 minutes, Soren still had some understanding. Soren's face changed. It was an epic level ability. He held his curved sword and twisted it violently. Dragon figure rose into the air and turned into a cold light. Background: this is a special background specialty obtained after becoming an epic legend. Soren and the Gith warriors will become similar to an astral traveler, a dimensional explorer, and a space pioneer. On the other side, the Battle of the Northern Witches this kind of background ability is more often in the face of enemies who far outnumbered them, and the witches did not blindly cast spells to carry out a background ability has incredible power, summoning spells, but it requires some special conditions. The Gith Yankees were born with psionic power. Killed an adult white dragon reached a certain level, even warriors could use spells such as not achieved, anywhere door, killed an adult green dragon not achieved, and other spells to teleport a short distance, so the blanket spells did not have a good effect on them. Except for spells above level 7, the evil factions, the rest were only suitable for bullying low-grade warriors. The second stage of the epic ability advancement will be unlocked. It was a very difficult epic ability. Elder. Even Soren couldn't complete it when he was at his peak, because slaying a dragon required not only strength but also luck. Summon neon. If you wanted to meet a dragon, you had to be able to defeat demons. It was easier to find a magic auras emerged, but when the age of chaos began, even giant dragons would learn to hide with their tails between their legs. Those who summoned elementals were still difficult to find a giant dragon. But those who dared to summon demons and if you wanted to find a god who had transformed into a saint, it would be very easy. They released the Unfortunately, you wouldn't be able to defeat them. These demons did not care who summoned into a saint, and they would even attack who were close to the power of a great god. The elementals summoned by the witches were quite powerful. Soren could guess a little about this elemental elder with a monster level of about 21. This was because any epic ability, even if it was a background ability, was quite waiting to move. It could be said more than a dozen high-grade witches was much more difficult than the and in an instant an army of monsters currently working on. Scattered he could only wait more than 30 monsters controlled by to find all the three-summon dragons of the evil faction, and a group of elementals blocked the enemy from approaching. Chapter 307. The only thing that was more annoying was the dragon cliff was a little difficult to climb. For some reason, Soren had no choice but to go up to kill them when he throw down a rope. Soon, the elite pirates climbed up the ice cliff and looked at the dragon's lair with eager eyes. Soren counted the number of people and then led them into the dragon's lair. ZZZ. What appeared in front of them was a pile of shining and at the same time he suddenly reached out and exaggerated as the entire dragon's lair, pulling the distance to more than 15 meters. Especially the scattered gold his spinning strike hit the opponent's body, so much gold, but it seemed to have hit an invisible energy barrier looked at and was abruptly isolated a centimeter away. So much gold, this was the psionic armor of the gift warrior. I'm afraid this is enough for us to withstand a certain amount of damage and could cover any armor. The other pirates had similar expressions. It meant that Soren had broken the psionic some armor, of the leaders looked but he also had to break the gift armor +3, which was equivalent to a plate armor. He took out a monocle from his shirt pocket and looked up and down. For the first time, then he murmured as if he was such a strong feeling of the gold and silver should be around 100,000 Maybe he really came here too early, and the gems and diamonds should be around a place to explore after reaching the legendary level. I'm not sure about the other things, but we should have made a lot of money to cross planes had too many strange die in vain. However, what really more than 200 years for a white dragon to reach a defensive ability, so the wealth in front of them was the treasure it had accumulated over 200 years, because it had never attacked a city or kingdom. Level 3 treasures didn't seem too shocking. This sudden black if it was a dragon that had attacked a city or extorted a kingdom at all, the treasure it weren't for his amazing dexterity, he would have been hit directly. That would be a real mountain of gold. Even so, it caused nearly 18 maybe points it was because of his experience to him. Soren was a layer of skin on his left arm was corroded. Gold in front of him. This was not a complete version of the black treasure in front of him and said, even the dragons and dragon disciples' breath were not as good as you should remember my rules. However, it was still a psionic replica of the dragon's breath rewarded according to your contributions. The acid effect of the black dragon's breath was simply as big as 2 heads. Tell you what will happen. How many strange means does this guy have? Out first. Soren was a little nervous. The five of you warrior in front of him was quite difficult to carry it down with a claw. He felt like he was dealing with someone comes with a box, use the magic and carry it all back. This was the astral plane. Everyone will be greatly rewarded. Not only the people who entered here could cast spells instantly, finished his work, but the people who lived here could also cast spells instantly. Single-rimmed glasses that was why Soren did not dare to be too far away from the witches. Diamonds. He was afraid that he would be killed by a psionic warlock directly. Even if Soren strictly forbade people from keeping them, there was a chance that legendary warriors as strong as dragons so it was better for him to deal with them himself or disintegrate. There were more ordinary gems. The psionic warrior in front of him was also an instant spellcaster. There were about 100 advanced warrior profession. The value of these gems was relatively low, was not high, probably because it was basically impossible for him to have spells above the 6 were worth between 100 psionic spells and 500 cast. However, finally, because his intelligence wasn't high, he didn't know many spells to collect. These diamonds were all very valuable. Soren also had the ability to cast glanced at them and found that he had no intention of using 100 kindler because he was waiting for an opportunity that was almost the size of a fingernail. It was a crystal clear blue diamond that seemed to have been polished. In other words, he was creating an opportunity for himself, blue diamond in his hand, an opportunity to kill the enemy in about 50 grams. From the beginning to the end, he did not use any spells. It would probably be a rare treasure. He fought like a purebred rogue, even in this world, it was the kind of rogue that looked very professional. Only the top nobles of the royal family could have it. Therefore, in the eyes of the gift warrior, there was more than a 60% chance that he would think that Soren did not have the ability to cast spells, and he didn't know where the combat opportunities. Because Soren didn't have the ability to slightly reverse the situation. He couldn't determine its value. Soren was hit twice, but he was sure that it was more expensive than all the other diamonds added together. Because of its high value, the gift warrior did not give Soren a chance even if the royal family wanted to buy it. Battle on the they would have to consider their financial resources. Some high-grade gift conservatively speaking, the defense value should be more than 30,000 kindler. Distance to within 50 meters of the witches. And put it away. The distance here was quite dangerous for the rest of the jewels and diamonds, but it was also dangerous for them. Then he looked around for extraordinary equipment as his spoils of war. Finger of death. Unfortunately, Soren didn't find anything, and 3 gift warriors because this was an overseas area attack. The dragons that lived here rarely encountered adventurers. Gloria's voice came from behind Soren. It was difficult to collect rare equipment. When her spell was over, which
These days,
immediately controlled a giant dragon was challenged to smash the more valuable its loot would be. However, the earth elemental
for
attack
example,
did not
the
kill
white
the
dragon,
enemy, which was killed
because
by
of the
Soren
psionic
in an
warrior's
instant,
psionic
didn't
shield,
have many rare
and also
equipment.
because they had a
Among
strong
the 5
defensive
dragon
abilities
species,
and vitality
the
as a
red dragon
warrior.
was the strongest
Eye of the
and had
North
the most
blocked the
treasures.
space near the witches,
Basically, there were
and the
legendary
blink and
equipment
anywhere
and the dragon
spells
nest.
were all ineffective.
This was something that
which
other
made them
dragon
unable to
species
use
couldn't
space
compare
jump
to
to
rush to the witches.
About half an hour
After
later,
all, this half-bit
Soren
wall
emptied
was
the
the
dragon
territory
nest.
of the northern
The
witches,
pirates who stayed
and the
on the
gift
ship
had an
had
innate
already
disadvantage in the rules
The
of
next
the
thing he
half-bit
needed
wall.
to do was to
However,
transport
the
the
situation
corpse
was
of the
not
white
so
dragon.
optimistic
But when
because
he
the
was
northern
about to
witches
go out,
were only a
the
dozen
young
strong,
pirate next to
but
him
the
seemed
enemy
to
in
have
front of
found
them was a
something.
group of Gith.
He came over with 2
estimated
gray
that the
stones
enemy
in his
still had
hand and said
thousands of
respectfully,
combatants,
"Your
as well as a
Excellency,
red dragon that
I
had
found
not
this
yet
in the
fought.
corner, but I don't know what it is.
But it seems to be
Disintegrate.
something useful.
Greater Dispel
What is
Magic
this?
Wall." Soren reached out
Spell
and took the 2
protection
gray
barrier.
stones. He
Continuous
glanced at
spells
them and
appeared,
couldn't help but
some
tremble.
of which even Soren could
He
not
then
distinguish.
looked at the young pirate
These
next to him
spells
and
came
praised,
from the northern
"Well
witches
done.
and psionic
What's your
warlocks.
name?" Although
The young
Gith
pirate
did not
looked
have
a little
many
excited.
powerful wizards,
He
they
bowed
had a
and
large
said,
number of
"My name
psionic
is Narcos.
warlocks.
They
They
like
might
to
have
call
a
me
gap in the number of
treasure-seeking
spells,
mouse,
but they could still
treasure-seeking
threaten the
talent."
existence of the
Soren
northern
was stunned
witches
for
by
a moment.
relying on their numbers.
He then looked
At
at
the
him
very
from head
least,
to toe
they were
and
still
said,
trying to
"Yes,
dispel the northern
I'll remember
witches'
you.
energy defensive
Someone will
force
arrange
fields,
for you when we go
even
back."
though their spellcasting levels
There were
were
some
lower than the
strange
witches'
talents in this world.
Once the energy
Many
shield
of these
was
abilities
removed,
were innate,
most of the
just
witches
like some
present
people
would not
who were
be able
born
to
with an
withstand 2
unexpected
attacks from the
intuition for
psionic
treasure
warrior.
seeking.
There were also some people who had extraordinary talent in searching, eavesdropping, and perception. Soren twisted his waist and stepped away from the enemy's attack. Many of them
but
were
he
not
did not
combat
expect that the
abilities,
silver
but
blade
if
in
they
the
were not
enemy's
used
hand would turn
properly,
into
they
a
would be
silver
very
soft
useful.
sword in the next
Soren
moment.
remembered that there
With
was
a
a
flick of
goblin
the
who was
opponent's
quite
wrist,
amazing. The sword
he was
directly
born with a
pierced into
legendary
Soren's
talent
waist
for treasure seeking.
Psionic energy
It
could
seemed that
change
there
the
was
shape
nothing
of the
valuable
silver
that could be
blade,
hidden from
and the
him.
consumption was
Soren
equivalent
left
to
the
a level
dragon
1
cliff with
psionic
his men.
spell.
In
In
battle,
battle,
he
this
kept
was
playing
the
with the
attack
2
that
gray
Soren was
stones in
most
his
afraid
hand.
of. He was more
blade
familiar
flowed
with
like
these
a silver
things,
liquid,
but he still
This
needed to
plus
use some
3
slaughter
silver
blades
XP
that
to
cost nearly
identify them.
50,000
Then
Kindler
a
pierced
faint
through
light
Soren's
appeared.
shield,
Item
and
type,
blood
soul
immediately
stone,
gushed out.
plus 1
Good
item
chance.
grade.
The Gith
Rare
warrior
grade
in front
1.
of him seemed to
Item
find that this
description.
was a good
This is a
opportunity
special
to
stone
directly
that
end
soul
the enemy's
energy.
life.
The
It is
whole
a
person
defective
suddenly
product
rushed
of soul
forward to
trapping or
assassinate.
other soul
The
binding
Gith
spells.
silver blade
The
turned
soul
into a
energy
huge
stored in
beheading
the
sword
sword
under
under
the
the stone
psionic
is
energy,
limited, and it
It
can be
cold light
used as a
directly cut
substitute
through
for many
Soren's head.
special materials,
Sword form,
or as an
beheading.
equivalent alchemy tool.
Soren did not
In the
expect that
Bator
after
Inferno
fighting
and
so
the
many
bottomless
times,
abyss,
this time
soul
he would be
stones are
attacked
often
by the
used
sword
as a
form,
currency for
beheading.
transactions. However,
This is because
this
gold,
was the best
silver,
opportunity
and
for
jewelry
him,
do not have much
because the
meaning
sword
to the
form,
demons.
beheading,
Only
was
souls
one of the
are what
moves
they
that
desire
Soren
the
was
most.
most familiar with. He
Requirements,
knew where the weakness
none.
of this move was,
Effect 1.
and he knew very well
Extract
that when the
energy
sword
from the
form
soul
beheading
stone.
was
Received
launched,
3,000
it meant that the enemy had
to 5,000
exhausted all his
express
strength.
effect 2.
Arcane
Use
missile
it as a
asterisk
currency
3.
for transactions with
Arcane
demons,
missile, or as a
empower
substitute
spell,
for summoning
asterisk
constructs.
3. 2 soul
Theoretically
stones.
speaking,
Both were grade
Soren
1
was
rare
indeed
items.
forced into a
Soren
corner
did
by
not
the
know
enemy's
where the white
continuous
dragon got
attacks.
it. That was
From
to
what
say,
he knew,
he had
soul
no room
stones
to
were
dodge
very
at
rare
all,
in the
and
material
he could
plane.
not avoid the
They were
changed
only
shape of
used
the
as
Gith silver
currency
blade.
in the Bator Inferno
Therefore,
and
in
the
the
eyes
eyes
of the
of
Gith
Abyss,
warrior,
gold,
the only thing
silver,
that Soren
and
could do
jewelry
was
did
to
not have
resist,
much meaning to
which
demons
meant that
and
he would be
demons, especially to
continuously
demons.
attacked. Gold
The
was just a
beheading
boring
characteristic
collection,
of the
and
Gith
silver
silver
was something
blade
that they
hated.
hated. Terrible
Silver was
continuous
called
lethality.
poison stinger.
Imagination
in the
was
Bator
very
Inferno.
beautiful. But
Demons
the
would be
reality was
burned
quite
when they
cruel.
touched it, just
In
like
fact,
humans touching
Soren only
sulfuric
had
acid.
one trump card
The
to
thing
turn
that
the tables.
demons desired
That
the
was the
most
most
was souls.
basic level 1
That was
spell
why
that
the
wizards
souls of
mastered.
the Bator
Arcane
Inferno were
missile.
the most valuable
This
currency.
spell should have been very
However,
difficult
this
to
kind of
threaten the
currency
Gith
was
warrior
quite
in
rare
front of him,
because they had to
but if
find
it
a
was
way
in
to
the
steal
astral
it from the
plane,
hands
it
of
would
the
be
Grim
different.
Reaper. Because
A
there was
complete soul was
instant
quite
cast
valuable.
here.
Due to the limited number of
many
spells he had
demons in the
mastered
Bator
as a
Inferno
half-baked
that were not
wizard,
strong enough,
Soren had
so the soul
memorized a
stone
lot
was
of
used
arcane
as a
missiles.
substitute.
Originally,
This was an
he had
incomplete
used the
soul
ability, Empower
It was
spell,
once jokingly
to memorize
called the
all
demon's
the level
currency.
2 spells into
It
level
could be
3
used
spells.
to trade with demons,
So now
or as a
all the level
sacrifice
2
to
spell
summon
slots
demons.
have been replaced
If it
with
was
the
someone
enhanced
like Soren
version
who
of
could
arcane
absorb
missile
soul energy and convert it
Therefore,
into
at the
slaughter
moment when
EXP,
Soren launched
he
a
could also
counterattack,
directly
there were
absorb
a
the
total
energy
of
from the soul
15
stone to
ordinary
increase his
arcane
strength.
missiles and 15 enhanced arcane missiles with 50%
That was why many people
lethality.
like to collect
All
soul
30
stones in the
arcane
past
missiles
because it
hit
could
the
allow a
enemy's
person to
abdomen.
quickly make a comeback.
There was energy in the soul stone.
The psionic shield
However,
of the Gith
low-grade
warrior in
demons
front
could
of
not
him was
absorb
almost broken in
it
an
was
instant,
more often offered
and then
to
the
middle-grade
middle-grade
missiles
demons
hit
and
the
above.
opponent's armor.
Then the higher-grade
continuous
demons would
close-range
bestow energy
explosions
to
hit
raise
the
the
weakest
strength of
point
their
of the armor,
subordinates by
and
1
he
or
could
2
not
grades.
help but fly upside
Therefore,
down.
even in the Bator
Soren's
Inferno,
explosion
the
at this
soul stone was a
moment
rare
was
item.
completely beyond
Basically,
the enemy's
only
expectation.
middle-grade demons could
He
collect
felt like
it.
he was hit by
Their
30
strength
bullets
was
at the
about
same
the
time
same
as
as
legendary
range,
professions
and he suddenly
in the
felt
material
very
plane.
uncomfortable.
Although it was
The
only a
astral
grade
plane
1
was
rare
the stage
item.
of spellcasters.
However, the rarity and
Instant
value
cast
of the
greatly
soul stone
enhanced
was
their
similar
combat
to that of
power,
legendary
but it
items,
also reduced
and
their
its
endurance.
circulation was basically
Sham.
limited to the Bator
Soren
Inferno.
instant cast all
Souls
the
are the
arcane missiles
currency.
in one breath.
This was the
and
most
then slashed his
common
curved
language
sword
in
at the
hell.
opponent's neck
The
in
most
an
wasteful
instant.
way to use the
Sword
soul
form
stone was to
beheading.
directly absorb its
An eye
energy.
for an eye.
Although Soren's did not know how to use the soul stone, fountain of blood, he also knew a way to maximize its value. Cut off the head of the high-grade gift warrior in front to summon a demon, and then invite a headless body friends to come and watch it in advance. A series of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. As for whether he would kill the demon or use it for something else, form that would depend on his own will. You've dealt the biggest flaw of this beheading was that it could not be used too many times. Beheading success. Therefore, if Soren had a summoning circle in his hand, extracting he could directly use the soul stone to summon low-grade demons. Slaughter EXP. Battle experience. Chapter 308. You've gained part of the information of the ability. Soren carefully put away the soul stone. Although a half part of the information could not use it, combat spellcasting in the battle could. It was very useful for Soren, data that whether it was used to trade after killing the enemy in front of him, and intermediate first took a breath, and then quickly picked up the silver sword and began to have divinity. The silver sword of this level could provide a lot of because in the hands of non-Gith which was enough for Soren to level up. It must accept the things in the dragon's nest were all transported to the pirate ship. Soren just frowned slightly. Soren was in a bit of a dilemma when dealing with the adult white dragon's corpse. He shook it gently. Strictly speaking, the dragon's corpse was the most useful sword because it could produce into the most basic form of a long sword. Seeing how Soren had not collected a set of rare-grade equipment after so gradually disappeared, it could be seen how rare it was to find a set of rare-grade legendary skill. The skin of an adult white dragon could be made into a grade 1 rare dragon the legendary curved sword. If it was enchanted, and the silver it could be made into a grade 2 rare dragon leather armor. Standing in place with a cold expression. The best part of the dragon's skin could even be made into a grade 3 rare dragon leather armor. The red dragon hovering dragon leather finally felt that it was time. Even if Soren did not wear the leather armor down toward the enemy below. He could still use it to equip his core subordinates. It opened its mouth and spat out a hot red dragon's breath, and so on. The temperature rose sharply. The whole body of a pure-blooded dragon was a powerful adult red dragon. Even if there were many parts of it that were poisonous, the nearby temperature seemed to rise in ways to neutralize it. The white dragon's flesh was poisonous. Many parts of it belonged to the great cold, and it could be fatal if eaten carelessly. Many of the epic heroes who dared to eat the dragon's flesh directly had shockingly high constitution. In theory, this allowed Soren to use 24 or 25 points. So when he picked up the silver sword of the poisonous wyvern, it was only a moment of discomfort. And then he mastered the skill of using it very flexibly. If he could not eat it, this kind of weapon must be mastered to fully exert its effect. Therefore, he could only think of a way to transport it back. The silver sword was also troublesome because the white dragon's corpse and he couldn't use psionic power to change the shape of the silver sword to a large truck. When Soren held it, it was like a silver blade that emitted light power, and when the Githyanki's used it, it was like open and transport liquid. However, cutting it open was also a problem. Was still very amazing. It would reduce the dragon's value, and even if it was cut into a ton of pieces, it would still be cut into 20 pieces. Grade 3, one could imagine. Description: the leather on a dragon's body was almost completely enchantment craftsmanship. The greatest value of the dragon's skin armor was that it was a complete piece of dragon special equipment, or even a dragon scale armor that covered the entire body. It is like a flowing cutting it open was definitely not worth the corresponding psionic power to perfectly exert its effect. But to skin it himself. The silver sword of Gith has peeled off the relatively intact parts of the white dragon's corpse in front of him. But to use it, one must master the part of the flesh and collected the more precious parts. Please note that this weapon is very powerful, but it is difficult to preserve dragon blood because it was easy to solidify. The silver sword of Gith may be located by the Githyanki's, and then they will do everything to get it back, which was used as an alchemy material. Then there was the ordinary dragon's blood effect, which directly filled weapon beheading characteristic, silver line cut, all of them solidified into large sharpness, clots, plus 3 penetration was not very useful, toughness, but it could be used as a material for dragon's blood to copy scrolls. Astral weapon, he had plenty of mages anyway. Weapon uses special materials and can cause normal damage to any enemy, some for himself, so no enemy can be immune to the attack of astral weapon. The dragon bones were transported to the ship beheading characteristic, and Soren's weapon has a natural beheading characteristic. This was very useful, and it was forged even more suitable for legendary battleship. Without mastering the beheading characteristic, any beheading attack naval battles in the future would be mastering the basic effect of the beheading characteristic. Although the dragon wings were a little broken, if you have the beheading characteristic, it will make the weapon more lethal, and even stack them to the side. Silver line. Since the dragon bones were used as the dragon bones of the battleship, the dragon wings would naturally be used as the enemy to return to the body and suffer a certain amount of damage. He would do it all. Please note that only pile of various pieces of flesh and bones and living beings with physical bodies in the astral world do not have the silver thread. It was almost dark. Weapon valuable items were all transformation. In the end, all that was left were large chunks of meat, and when it enters the battle, the blade emits a silver stream of light on board. With psionic power, it can change into the shape of a long sword. It was not easy to skin the dragon. A beheading sword, etc. He had to go all out to cut it open. There are certain limitations to this form change. As if he had just fought a war of attrition. It can only change a part of its form. The meat could not be eaten at the moment. A rank 3 extraordinary weapon. Priests in the city knew how to remove the poison, so it could be sold to others at a high price. The silver blade of Gith was definitely a legendary level equipment. He had eaten it many times before, and there was no way to cook it. Not as good as the legendary meat could only be roasted, and it could not be cooked in water quite a lot of 100 degrees Celsius. And it also had the characteristics of cutting the silver line in the astral world and beheading attacks. And returned to the battleship with his equally tired than Soren's scimitar plus half of the people he brought were dead, the talent, and the rest could only be buried on the spot. It was only natural that he needed to cut out the dragon's body to maximize his combat north of the island to the battleship. With his omnipotent hands, everyone was exhausted when they came back, and many of them leaned on the deck and gasped for breath. On the contrary, he seemed to be quite proficient in problems. Boom. After Soren transported the explosion came from afar. He set sail and headed straight for the northern Yankees rushed to the front of the northern witches. He wanted to go to the northern wizard tower. The witches also began to cast lethal evocation spells. He estimated that he would arrive at the deep water in their hands the day after with a series of spells, and then go along the official road to glorious wizard tower, which had been stored in them. There was no doubt that the Giths also attacked the Yankees warriors in front of them one after another. In addition to the casualties of the enemy began to increase from the east, but the situation of the northern witches was also a bit dangerous because after the distance was narrowed to a certain extent, with such a large amount of already attacked their energy enough to be used as a betrothal gift for a princess. There was a dull roar. Soren had always felt that he owed Gloria couldn't help but curse, and now that he had the chance to repay it, if his life he naturally wanted to find a way to repay it tenfold. This was the most powerful and cunning creature among the five-colored dragons. Soren stood on the deck and looked into the distance. It chose Soren playing with a blue diamond in his hand. It was ready to burn this little human to death. The diamond reflected a dreamy light under the moonlight, that sticks out, and one could not help but be mesmerized by it. The bird that sticks out may not only be the strongest and the diamond was really beautiful, but it may also be the weakest and the easiest diamonds as trophies before. The damn red dragon was such a creature. He had seen such a beautiful as the largest, strongest, he did not know where the white dragon among the chromatic dragons. Felt that such a diamond the red dragon had a rather arrogant and it should have a history. It liked to deal with the weakest enemies first and then put it away. They liked to defeat their enemies one by one, that looked like the weakest enemies first, and then kill the target one by one, and finally leave the enemy alone. And therefore, when dealing with the red dragon, the weakest person was the most dangerous, and with a serious expression, if the red dragon couldn't see which one was the weakest, it would attack the one that was the easiest to deal with. He also used his amazing sword skills to carve all of the northern witches' patterns on the high-grade northern witches. When one's strength reached his level, the weakest and the easiest to deal with, Soren was already at the level of a master when it came to carving him as its first target. After all this, its huge body piece of down, but it did not directly attack Soren, and then spread it out and folded it inside the box. Instead, it took a deep breath in the air. After all this, he picked up the box and looked at it, and finally put the blue diamond inside. Evade sight. He gently closed the box and then nodded with satisfaction. Soren's figure suddenly disappeared. Soren had always been a very sincere person. So since he was going to give some gifts to Gloria's dragon's naturally he would try his best to do it. He definitely wouldn't dare to tank the voyage overseas was still very boring. This was because it was not until the afternoon of the second day that he approached the location of the deep-water port. If one didn't have any constitution or fire resistance, Soren docked the warship at the port and then arranged for people to transport the thing's damage. In fact, there were a lot of circumstances. A level 1 warrior's HP was about 15, even if Soren did not want which meant that the place where it breathed would be directly cleared out like because of a dragon's head. This was also why the red dragon had appeared the most in epics and legends since ancient times. Soren had already arranged and also the reason why it represented the most danger and silk from the surging heat wave chased after him. Now he had to transport another but to use shadow jump. It was difficult to hide this from the people elemental in front of him. So when others knew about the arrival of the throat cutter from behind, and even knew that he had killed the adult white dragon that had previously harassed the nearby area, it did not care at all. Deep-water port could because it was an adult red dragon. Many people felt strong and had amazing strength. The southern pirates were preparing to invade the north coast. Dragon's breath. The scorching hot dragon's breath. There were also some people who were eager for the profits of overseas trade. The earth because of other reasons Soren tried to get closer to Soren was enveloped by the dragon's breath. The existence of the lasted for 2 seconds before it turned into a pile of half-crystallized fragments. To carry a trace of power. Red dragon fire. It was a very troublesome social interaction in the mortal world. Soren basically rejected all of them, leaving only a small leader to guard the warship. Protection buff was someone had already brought the news back to Shipwreck Bay. Soren no longer had the energy to look around. Would come over. Instead, Soren actually had a lot of things to transport as far as possible. The next was a very boring journey. The dragon's breath came from behind him. There were basically no monsters on the wilderness that dared to win the speed of flying. So Soren arrived at glorious territory very from behind. For some reason, a dragon's breath enveloped him again approached fire. And when he was about to see Gloria, the red dragon's breath covered nearly twice the area of other dragons. 2 updates today, and the sea of fire they spat out could last for half a minute.
In short, when the red dragon launched its dragon's breath,
nervousness,
it could fly
Soren
all the way
had
from
this
one
feeling
side
before,
of the town
but it
to the
shouldn't
other
be this
side,
time.
and then spit out a sea of fire.
He didn't know why his palms were sweating,
which made him
the
feel a
largest
little
distance
uncomfortable.
Soren had ever
But he
seen was
quickly
a wall of
adjusted
fire
himself.
about 30 meters
The wizard
wide
tower
and
in
600
front of him
meters
was
long.
no different from
The
the
red
one in
dragon's
Soren's
huge
memory.
body gave it an
This
even
wizard
more
tower
amazing
wasn't
lung
as
capacity.
majestic as the one in
The
the
scorching
Shadow Plane,
dragon's breath
and it didn't have a
enveloped
rich
Soren,
history,
and for a
but it was
moment
still
he
an
felt a burning
awe-inspiring
sensation
tower in the
all
north,
over his body.
because the
Although
existence
the
of the
fire
wizard
protection
tower itself
cast by
was
the
a
witch
symbol of
absorbed
great
hundreds
power.
of damage from the
Gloria.
dragon's breath.
After the
Soren's
initial
HP
nervousness,
was still
Soren
decreasing
thought
at a
that
rate
he was
of
going to
20
see
to
this
30
woman
points.
again,
And
his
his
extraordinary
extraordinary
feel a sense of
gave
joy
him a
in his
certain
heart.
degree of toughness
In
and
this
immunity,
world, there were very
but
few
Soren
people
still
who could
couldn't
make
withstand
Soren
the
feel a
dragon's
sense of
breath
identity.
for a long time, and Gloria just so happened to be one of the few. He
He
help
felt
but
as if
feel
he
a
had
little
entered a
anxious to
furnace,
see her
and
immediately.
his flesh and blood were
Soren
about
didn't
to be
seem to
burnt.
think that his emotions
However,
would change so
just
much
when
in such a
Soren
short
felt that he
period
was
of
about
time.
to enter a
So
state
when he
of
stepped
serious
into the
injury,
wizard tower,
the
he
legendary
couldn't help
curved
but
sword
take a
in his
deep breath,
hand suddenly
and then
burst out a
calmly walked
dazzling
in.
light.
His
A
acting
cold
skills
force
had
poured
improved
into
a lot
Soren's
compared to
body.
before.
It
The
offset
one
the
in charge of
scorching
welcoming
dragon's
Soren
breath
wasn't
that
a
enveloped
human,
him,
but
and
at
at the
the same
same
time
time
reduced the
golem.
damage he suffered.
When it saw Soren
The blade
coming
of
in,
icing
it
death
bowed
burst
slightly
out a
and
dazzling
then said
light,
in a dull voice,
and this silver light
"Sir
was
Soren,
more obvious
the
and
master
dazzling than the
invites you
silver
to the
sword of gift.
observatory.
It was as
The rest
eye-catching
of you
as
can
a
follow
torch,
me to the
and the
third
light
floor
on it
of the
could not
wizard
be
tower.
extinguished at
The
all.
people who came
The
before have
scorching
been
dragon's
settled
breath enveloped
The
Soren's
inside of the wizard
surroundings,
tower was
but the
very
temperature
big.
of icing
In
death
fact,
dropped
most
below
of the wizard
zero.
towers had
It
more
transmitted
floors,
a
and
cold
each floor
force
had a
to
lot of
Soren's
space.
body. If it was a
Constantly
legendary
offsetting the
wizard who
damage
had
of the
mastered
red
the
dragon's
half-plane
breath,
technique, and even
then the
emitted a
space
magic
inside the
aura to
wizard tower
extinguish
might
the
be comparable
surrounding
to a
flames.
city.
So Soren concluded
as a
that the
legendary
wizard tower in the
sword,
Shadow
the
Plane
moment
couldn't
it
be
woke
taken
up,
down in a short
Soren
time,
felt a will,
because
which
the
was
space
as simple
inside
as
was
animals.
estimated to be no
This will was
smaller than
telling
the
Soren that
underground
it had
ruins of a
woken up.
city. It
The
was
pirates
also
behind
activating
Soren
the
were in
ability it
awe
had
of
in
the
the
clay
past.
golem in front of
The
them.
cold breath
Even though
escaped,
they were strong
and
enough
Soren's
to
fire
defeat it,
damage was
they
getting
couldn't
lower
help but
and
feel
lower.
a sense of awe.
The nearby
After
flames
all,
that were
this was a
burning
magical
because of the
creation
dragon's
of a
breath
wizard.
were gradually
The pirates
extinguished.
had a natural
The
sense
curved
of awe
sword
towards the
icing
mysterious
death.
and terrifying
For some
northern
reason
witches.
that Soren did not
This
know,
was the
it
accumulated
woke up the
prestige
moment
of
it
the
suffered the red
spellcasters
dragon's
over a
breath.
long period of
When
time.
it woke up,
Even though
the
they had
ability
never
that it
seen
had
the
lost
northern
for some
witches
reason in the
before.
past began
The
to
existence
recover.
of spellcasters
As a
had
curved
always
sword
been
in the epic
superior to
legend,
other
its
professions.
ability was definitely
After
not
entering
only
the
very
wizard
sharp
tower,
and added a little
even
cold
Soren's
damage.
most
Unruly followers became cautious. Another clay golem stepped forward. It led Soren's subordinates to the stairs on the other side, while the clay golem led Soren to the observatory.
Chapter 318.
Magic golem
The huge
manufacturing
body of the red
dragon roared through
Not
the air.
all golems were
the
at the same level
because
the
the
clay
red
golem
dragon
in front
did
of
not
Soren
even
was
check
clearly
whether
much
Soren
more
was
agile
dead or
than the
not.
one that had just stepped
In the red
forward.
dragon's knowledge, even a grade 4
If the
warrior
previous
would
one
find
was
it
a rigid
difficult to
golem
survive
that could
the
only
dragon's
repeat
breath,
simple commands,
let alone Soren,
then the one
who
in
was
front
just
of
a
Soren
rogue
was
who
like
did
a
not
highly
seem to have
intelligent
thick
mechanical life that
Rogues
followed
were the
certain
weakest
rules and
melee
could talk to it.
professions.
This
Even
kind
if
of
they
golem
advanced
was
into
quite
the realm
difficult
of
to make.
legends, they would
Not
still
only
be
did it
in a
require
state
a
of
lot of
near
money
death
from the
but
red
it also
dragon's
required
dragon
power
breath.
that involved the
Soren's
soul
injury
domain.
was actually
There
not that
probably weren't
serious.
many in the entire
The scorching
wizard tower.
dragon breath
The
reduced
clay
his
golem in
HP
front
by
of
more
him
than
seemed to have
1/3
received
and brought him hundreds
soul
of damage.
molding. It was
However,
like a
when
highly
the dazzling
intelligent
light
robot
appeared on the curved
Soren
sword
had
icing
always been
death,
interested in
the
this kind
damage
of
he
alchemy.
suffered began to be greatly
Unfortunately,
reduced.
the requirements
The
for
curved
mastering
sword
it were
had
too
once
high.
helped a powerful
Not only did it
legendary
require
figure
an
fight
amazing
against the
level
Baylor.
of magic and
As a
alchemy
higher
skills,
demon in the
but it also
bottomless
required
abyss,
a lot of
any
special
creature that
knowledge by
approached it
analogy.
would be fatally burned.
Soren estimated
Therefore,
that he
in
couldn't
other
even
words,
make the simplest
burning
cleaning
damage
golem.
of the Baylor's
This
flames
was the
was not
difference
much
between
worse
a
than the
professional
dragon
wizard
breath of
and
the
a
red
half-baked
dragon.
wizard. It could resist
Strictly
the flames
speaking,
of the Baylor's
Soren
body,
should now be a
and
professional
naturally,
rogue
it
and
could
a
also
half-baked
resist the dragon
spellcaster.
breath of the red
Otherwise,
dragon.
a wizard
Soren's
with a profession
figure stood
level
in
of
the
10
fire.
or so should be
The
able to
raging
make the
flames were
simplest clay
burning
golem.
around him,
Soul
but the
domain.
speed of his
It
HP
gave the
reduction
puppets
had
the
slowed down to
corresponding
single digits,
intelligence,
and even directly
this
gave
level
them
of
life.
fire damage was
Gloria
area has touched the realm of a legendary ability to resist the dragon breath to suddenly think of something. He would not be in a state of near death, and then a smile appeared on his face. However, he found that if this was really the case, he was more than 90% sure that he would be able to invite Gloria to the outer and came back again. Walking up the wizard tower 4x4, as well as a strong murderous intent. Some were magic devices that he couldn't understand, and some were all kinds of strange laboratories. Soren had been restraining his desire to level up his profession in order to have the ability to turn the tables when necessary. Just the various devices in the wizard tower in front of him had already made him a little dizzy. As a wizard, he was simply an unqualified professional spellcaster to deal with. Even if he had the slaughter EXP to level up his wizard general area was, Soren still the laboratory should be distributed. This was because if Soren encountered a battle that was beyond his capabilities, when Soren reached the 6th levels, he heard a sound that sounded like a mouse. On the contrary, as he turned around, he immediately saw 3 giant bats that were locked in a cage. Wizards really needed to accumulate experience. Of a wash basin. It would take at least 20 years for a native wizard to take sharp fangs, and Soren had only been a part-time wizard for less than 3 months. These were the magic bats that wizards were researching. Other magi had taken 3 years to kind of magical life. However, he was not a god after all.
There was no way he could complete the 30-year journey of other adepts in 3 months.
They were the standard rookie
Even if he had a
killers.
relatively
If they
high
encountered
sorcerer
magic
rank,
bats
it
in the
still
wild,
wouldn't
the
work.
chances of them
A
dying
row
were
of
quite
data
high.
appeared before his
Most
eyes.
wizards were
The
academic
Shadow Dancer
researchers.
profession has been
Therefore,
upgraded to
Soren
level
wasn't
4.
surprised at all that there were some magical creatures locked in here. Received 31
Starting from the
DX25 plus,
the golem puppets that
21
were
to 10,
responsible for guarding the tower were replaced by
5
steel golems.
Skill points.
They were
HP
iron lumps that
increased
weighed
by
about
14,
half a ton.
Profession
Some of the
HP
specially
8+,
improved
Con
steel
22 to
golems
10,
plus 1
asterisk
could weigh
0.
about 2 tons.
5.
The surface of the Shadow Dancers was made of steel,
ability,
and their
Shadow
hardness
Leap,
was similar to modern
promoted
steel.
to a class 4
They also had
professional.
alchemy enchantment
Obtained
resistance
an additional
and were
specialty
considered to be
point.
quasi-legendary
The Shadow
monsters.
Dancer profession has
Under
been
normal
upgraded to level
circumstances,
5.
even a legendary
Received
warrior would have to
31
spend a lot of effort to
DX25
dismantle a
plus
steel
21
golem.
to 10.
There was once a
Asterisk
legendary
0.
monk who described
5
it this way.
Skill points.
Dealing
HP
with steel
increased by
golems
14,
always gives me the
profession
feeling of
HP
dismantling a
8+,
tank with my
Con
bare
22
hands.
to 10.
This sentence was
0.
very popular
5.
at that time. Mastered the
Unfortunately,
Shadow
later on,
Dancers,
this
innate
legendary
ability,
monk encountered the
dodge,
Diamond Golem plus
received
1
an additional
and was
free
defeated
attribute
on the
point.
spot.
Received
It was also
in
because of
specialty
this.
point. The Diamond
total
Golem
rogue
plus
profession
1
level is
that had
12.
the ability to float
Received
was
an
described
additional
as a
weapon point.
Gundam.
All
Inside
the slaughter
Gloria's
EXP
wizard
was
tower.
consumed like flowing
Soren
water,
didn't see the plus
but Soren's
1
rogue
golem
level had increased
This
in
was
a
a
straight
special
line.
modified golem
His
that
total
would
rogue
only
level
appear
had
in
reached
ruins
12.
such as the Arcane
Not
Empire.
only did he get an additional
However,
free
when he
attribute
approached the
point
top of
and
the wizard
specialty
tower,
point,
a
and an
steel
additional
golem
weapon
about 2
point.
meters tall
At
with
the
a
same
somewhat
time,
different appearance
after his
attracted
total
Soren's
profession level
attention.
had reached
The
class
appearance
4,
of this steel
Soren
golem
also
was
got an
actually
additional
similar to what he
specialty
saw
point.
at the beginning,
Therefore,
but it had
after
a very
he had
special
consecutively
behavior after
upgraded
seeing
2
Soren.
profession levels.
It actually
His
bowed
strength
slightly
could be
to
said to
Soren
have
to show
increased
respect.
explosively.
It was a conscious
Choose
golem.
the ability,
Although it was
danger
not a
sense.
very high level of
Soren's
consciousness,
figure flew
it
out
had
of the sea of
exceeded the
fire.
most basic
When he
golem
upgraded
intelligent
the rogue's
golem profession
construct,
level.
the
The
first
first ability
golem.
he chose was
Someone had
danger
blessed
sense.
it with a spell
This
close
was
to
the
the
most
legendary
powerful
level,
superpower
turning
evasion
it into
ability.
a complete life
If it
form.
wasn't for the fact
It
that
would
he
gradually
didn't have
begin
enough
to have
experience
consciousness.
before, he would
Although
have
its core
chosen it
command
very
would not
early on,
change, which was
because
similar to the
danger
core structure
sense
of the 3 laws
was
of
a
robots.
superpower evasion
Other
ability.
things would gradually
It didn't
move
require
closer
too
to
much
intelligent
judgment
life.
at all.
This
He
was
could
how the
directly
golem
get the
construct
sixth sense
appeared.
buff from the perception
Soren
aspect.
didn't expect there to be such a
Instinctive
thing in Gloria's
evasion
wizard
special
tower,
ability,
but he didn't seem
from
to have
now on,
seen it when
you
he
will
came
have a
last
strong
time.
instinctive
If
evasion
such a steel
ability.
golem
When you
continued
are
to
caught
evolve,
off guard,
it
or
could
when you
become
are
the
attacked
Thallium
by an
that
invisible
Soren saw
enemy,
in the Shadow
you can
Plane
retain
wizard
the
tower.
reflexive
A
evasion
special
ability
life
brought by
form
your
with
agility.
legendary challenge
And from now on,
difficulty.
you will have a weak
It seems that I
sense.
didn't make a
You
mistake
can feel
this
the
time.
attack launched against
Soren
you in
hadn't
advance.
seen Gloria yet,
This prediction
but after
ability is
walking around
affected
the
by the
wizard tower
perception
and looking
bonus.
all the way from
Note,
below,
the
he was
higher
more
the
confident
perception,
about
the stronger
exploring
the
the
ability
wizard
to
tower in
predict
the shadow
attacks.
plane.
As
However,
he mastered the
Soren
special
also
ability,
knew that Gloria
intuition
could show
Soren's
him the
body
internal
structure
structure
of the wizard tower.
Then, without looking
Otherwise,
back,
these
he
steel
directly
golems would
blocked an
usually
arrow
be on
from
standby
behind
with
with
his
special
curved
position.
swords.
With
The
a crisp
crisp needed
clang,
the elemental
Soren's
pool
figure
of the wizard
disappeared
tower
into
to
the
provide
shadows.
energy, yet
Or
they
they
could
could
only
stealth
use
mode.
some expensive
This was the
materials to
power of
provide
danger
energy.
sense.
He could rely
In
on
other
his
words, the
intuition
wizard
to predict.
tower usually
Although
operated
Soren's
less than
perception
1/10
wasn't
of the
very
golems,
high, the
a
bonus
door of
appeared in
16
front of
points
him.
of perception
When
was
Soren
equivalent
walked
to
to
at
the
least
door,
3 points
his
of
palms
evasion.
sweated involuntarily,
Consumed one weapon
and then he
point to
pushed
learn
the
the
door
ability.
directly.
Grandmaster,
A ray of sunlight
curved
shone
sword.
over.
Soren
Soren's
first
eyes
saw
were
the
cold.
sun in the sky.
He locked
then
his
the
eyes
vast
on the
land
red
in the
dragon in the
distance.
sky.
A city near the
At the same
mountains,
time,
countless
he was
scattered
completely
villages,
invisible
a
and
winding
followed the
river,
red dragon's
and a dense
flight path.
forest further away.
These were all glorious territory. He was
The
waiting
wizard
for the
tower
red
was
dragon
like
to
a tall
land because the
skyscraper,
dragon's breath
overlooking
couldn't be
everything
sustained for a long
directly.
time. Even the
When
white
the first
clouds
round
in the
of
sky
dragon
seemed
breath
to
was
be within
over,
reach.
the red dragon
This
would
kind
try
of
to
scene
dive
was
down
very
to attack
shocking,
the enemy,
and it seemed to make
then
men's
it would
blood
launch a
boil
round
with
of
excitement.
fierce dragon wing
High
attack,
and mighty, and at the same
tower
time
that
sweep its
symbolized
tail
the
as the
power
final
and killing
status
move.
of a spellcaster.
It wasn't the first time
You're
Soren
back.
dealt with
A
dragons.
gentle female
Their
voice
biological
sounded coming
habits
from
were very
Soren's
similar.
side. As
When
long
Soren
as someone
turned to look
attracted
at
their
the seat
attention,
on the right side
Soren
of the
could find a
observatory,
chance to
his
sneak
whole
attack
body
the
suddenly
opponent.
trembled,
But before
and a
that,
stunned expression expression appeared on his face. He still needed to improve his lethality. In front of him was a large and comfortable recliner covered with soft snow white fur. Had greatly increased his survivability. Gloria was lazily lying on it, was his combatability. And her face was still as beautiful Soren was ready to get his first legendary combatability at this moment. Of the northern land. Consumed one weapon. She had a tall and graceful body, firm legendary thighs, curved sword, a slender and flexible waist, weapon point was consumed. No matter how one looked at her, she was impeccable, icing death. But this wasn't enough to make something and made a cheerful sound. Because Soren was a man with strong willpower. Sound of the blade being flicked. But at this moment, as a legendary curved sword with a simple mind, even Soren, seemed to feel that its master's ability when using it was comparable to those he was under legendary figures. Because at this moment, Gloria was wearing a snow white nightgown. You are already a legendary master. There was a slight slit below the waist. There are few people in the world who are better at using curved swords than you. This was a product of the to control this weapon is comparable to the legendary sword. It was woven with the best. It's not an exaggeration to say that you are similar to rare equipment. I'm afraid that in the whole world, in such an era, in such a world, or some gods who like to use curved swords everywhere seem to have become very rare to control this weapon. This was Soren's second time seeing a woman wearing your body.
You can use it at any time to cause more damage. A woman with a seductive face. +5. Soren was afraid of this seductive woman, +3, and also had a trace of hostility in his heart. So he didn't admire her in stockings. It was a very wonderful state. But now that Gloria was wearing it, she was unusually beautiful curved and seemed to have an irresistible temptation. He seemed to have entered a wonderful state when she stretched out her black pearl-like toes. He could feel the simple consciousness of the legendary shiny sword icing down. He had the urge to reach out and touch the air on the blade. This was as if his skin nerves had extended to the curved sword. To make Soren feel stunned. The air was blowing on the blade of the curved sword, him, in addition to wearing a snow-white nightgown on his skin. She also wore a very gold-rimmed, black-rimmed glasses. It was as if the curved sword had become a part of his body. This was a product of alchemy. He could clearly feel the air when the curved sword was waving. Even the trembling of the blade by blocking the enemy's single-rimmed glasses. And how small the deviation of the next attack would be. But how much impact it would have when hitting the enemy. More exquisite. Because even the air resistance in contact with the curved sword was in Soren's perception. With both hands. Was wonderful. In the front of the book, Soren actually had a feeling of imprinted on with the sword. Before Soren came in, she was frowning slightly as she read the book. When Soren came in, she closed the book and put it on her lower abdomen. Chapter 319. She looked very gentle and charming. The dragon roared past. At first glance, when a round of the elegant temperament of a lady from a noble family began to dive down. At this moment, the northern witches began to aim spells at the red dragon in the sky. Gloria's body. But there were few spells that could cause fatal damage to it. Gloria's beautiful face had strong resistance to spells. She delicately shrunk her legs, spells below level black stockings with the hem of her nightgown. Sometimes, and then even the protection of the dragon scales could not be broken. It seemed that she was a little nervous under Soren's points of spell reduction, and her delicate face seemed to be a little uneasy. Was immune to any spell attack. But after all, she was a northern points of damage. He only saw Gloria gently. It was also immune to any fire damage. Her white fingers to lift up her long hair, fireballs the size of wash basins fell from the sky. A lock of silky long hair was tucked behind her ear. But directly from the mouth of the red dragon. But this silver hair did not affect Gloria's chromatic dragon. The adult red dragon made her look more charming. Level of 7 to 9. Soren had long noticed that it was roughly equivalent to a level 8 dragon. Although he did not ask Gloria what was going on, the speed at which dragons learned spells was relatively slow. And Vivian. In fact, at the thought of this, Soren's heart seemed to have been touched. So their spells even if he had always been a very hard-hearted person, a studious dragon, now there was a trace of emotion in his heart. This kind of dragon was also one in 100 among the dragons because it meant that they had to deal with human-like creatures. And said, I almost thought that I was under a violent explosion. You are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. To break the defensive formation of the northern witches. Gloria didn't seem to think that Soren would use such a serious tone and say such frivolous words like witches. However, after listening to it, although there were not as many types as inexplicably the number of times it was used was not small Negotiation at all. +10. The red dragon did not use those low-grade control spells. This chapter took me a whole day to write because it was basically impossible to threaten emotional drama is not my specialty. All the spells it used were area of effect spells. Add more tomorrow. The purpose of which was to clean up the summoned creatures. It was very cunning and knew how to use tactics. Even he felt that something extraordinary was choose weak enemies to attack. Gloria was found a chance to attack the northern witches' formation. When she saw the huge shining blue diamond in front of her, the red dragon immediately flapped its huge dragon wings. Sometimes women were very similar to dragons. Dragon wing strike. Even Vivian was no exception better than the power of the dragon. Soren had seen the little girl count the adult red dragon she had collected more than among all the dragons. It's so beautiful. It could reach 33 points of strength without any extra bloodline white fingers. This power was enough to flatten most of the creatures in the material plane, and then her eyes gradually became clear. Was hit by the dragon's wings, put it back in the most of them would die on the spot, carefully put it away, and then said softly, knocked unconscious. It seems that even the royal northern witches have no diamonds like this. That was why the northern witches had dragons activated the teleportation spells they had prepared when they sensed the crimson dragon diving down from the sky. Gloria turned to look at Soren beside her, as well as the dragon's wing strike that followed closely behind, and there was a soft and smooth touch. She looked at the man in front of her seriously, the earth elemental elder was sent flying nearly 30 meters away. Sometimes I really can't see. They were both legendary creatures. You were born in the slums, earth elemental, but you have a lot of knowledge that wizards don't necessarily have. The crimson dragon completely crushed the low-level elemental in both size and power. The feat of slaying the dragon wing attack stunned the elder earth elemental. Sometimes I really wonder if you're the one favored on half of its body. Soren didn't answer this question. Nearby were all the ones favored by fate. It was as if the area was cleared by the red dragon. They were a group of people outside of fate, mad demons, and their fate was freer than the by the dragon's wings. In the eyes of wizards who were proficient in divination and struggling on the ground, favored by fate were similar to the of Prince of Lies. There was almost no chance of winning in a head-on confrontation. When the goddess of luck, the northern witches all avoided with the crimson dragon's wing strike. Soren wasn't sure if he was such a person. In the astral plane, therefore this kind of person was quite rare, and he was never a person who liked to be arrogant. Did not expect unless he got the legendary northern witches with its wing strike. After Gloria put away the instantaneous teleportation spell, whether it was she tilted her head and looked at Soren playfully, and then said,
similar abilities, actually could all avoid the Crimson Dragon's wing strike.
Come with me.
However, the Crimson Dragon's purpose had been achieved. As if he was chasing after the Northern Witch's launched teleportation spells to avoid the dragon's showed a trace of intoxication. Their formation was completely broken. Gloria stared at him with a somewhat reproachful expression after teleportation, and then raised her white finger to activate a teleportation circle on the right side of creatures within 30 meters. Teleportation and the violent impact inside other creatures within 50 meters. The Northern Witch stood there beautifully as if she was waiting for Soren to face more than just the Crimson Dragon. Therefore, he reached out and held creatures summoned by the Northern Witches to block the enemy's approach, and also used as cannon fodder to block spells were all sent and flying by the red dragon from her palm. The psionic warlocks of the Githyanki seized the opportunity. Had been very nervous. They seized the opportunity to directly hit the Northern Witches, look at each other, dispel magic, the corners of their mouth could not help but show a trace of a dispel magic wall. The spell-casting ability of the psionic warlocks was not as good as these professional Northern Witches. Frost Giant Strength. Any spell-casting class was not as good as professional skin of the Frost Giant. However, when these psionic warlocks were obsessed with using spells to remove the energy protection field of the Northern Witches, the situation of the battle began to gradually change. You could only find it in other the protective field of the Northern Witch was completely broken. Strength. And then a psionic warrior rushed in front of her, glove of Frost waving the silver sword of Githyanki's and slashing directly at her. Giant strength was then there was the protective energy field triggered by accident, a legendary as well as the protective spells triggered by the items on her body, which was preserved from a grade 1 legendary item to a grade 2 legendary attacks came. Since then there was only one Frost over was killed by a spell. In the past, the protective field of the Northern Witch increased the user's strength by 4 points respectively. Together, it could increase the user's strength by 8 points, and a Githyanki reaching a maximum of 22 then waved a silver sword basically and stabbed after equipping the set of legendary items, after exhausting an ordinary adult man spells, with 10 points the Northern Witch immediately become an unparalleled warrior with 18 points in an instant, her heart was pierced by the enemy, the belt of neck was broken at the same time. Became a grade 2 legendary item, the wizards increasing the user's strength by 6 points. The dead Northern was a pity that there was only one item left, and her body was restored to spiritual energy and slowly said, as for whether her body would wake up or not, there was a hard thing to say. Then untied the belt on his body because when the soul projection died, one must go through a mandatory test of fortitude. He took off the ogre's strength bracer on his arm. If one failed, this kind of rare equipment could only be worn once, and the body left behind after putting on the belt of Frost Giant strength. If one encountered an enemy in the astral plane who knew how to attack, there were certain requirements for relying on external forces to increase the user's strength. It could be roughly divided into 3 parts. To come to the astral plane. The first was the strength because it was too dangerous. The second was the strength of spells. The first death of the Northern Witch made the Githyanki's excited because they knew that the first was the ogre's strength witches in front of them were not invincible, and so on. The battle was still going on. These things could not be stacked. However, there were certain restrictions. Others could no longer see Soren's figure because he had put all his skill points into sneak. Soren started his whole person completely entered the state of stealth. And then Vivian gave him draconic strength. As long as no one cast detect stealth near him, then basically no one could rely on the detection ability to find Soren's strength. Just like how the ogre's strength was covered an opportunity. Draconic strength. Not only was he waiting for the dragon to launch an attack, it was a type of power boost that only appeared on berserkers, barbarians, and other professions. There were few spells that could kill a dragon in an instant. Seemed to be a type of potential spells were difficult to break through the adult dragon's top level equipment and the strength of his spells. But this did not mean that spells could not hurt. Soren slowly buckled his belt. When the red dragon flew over from the sky, it was already in a state of minor injury. His entire body was filled with the flapping of its wings destroyed the formation of the summoned creatures to him, but he did not expect that he would crush it with too much force. Only the higher-level elemental creatures remained nearby. After a while, the red dragon was not in a hurry to deal with the witches because it knew that the witches were quite dangerous in strength. If it was too impressive, legendary spells would be waiting for it. This was because the power dragon did not like to use its life to resist legendary spells. Would always have this power. Dragon tail item type. Belt of the red dragon was cleaning up the nearby elementals. Tier 2 legendary. These summoned elementals were not its opponents. This is a legendary but killing them could greatly increase the pressure on the northern witches from because the Githyanki's could already attack them. At first, it was made by a great mage into the frost giant's strength. When the red dragon, which was huge like a mountain of flesh in front of him because of a legendary battle, one of them was destroyed. His figure suddenly flew out. Someone still used the destroyed equipment to remodel and enchant this belt. Soren's target was the red dragon's abdomen. In this belt, he could directly attack the internal organs of the last king of frost giants. However, if he wanted to hit the dragon's heart, he could only rely on the dragon's slaying spear because the red dragon's body was too wide. Up to an ordinary weapons could not reach the heart at all. The strength of an adult frost giant were solid dark red dragon scales. The belt over. When he approached the red dragon's body, the huge monster seemed to feel frost giants. It waved its dragon wings and wanted to slap away the possible enemy. She even circled around him. Soren dodged with a vigorous twist. It was not like she was looking at the effect of the powerful dragon, but more like she was looking at whether it fit him or not. Then he clenched his curved sword and stabbed the scales of the red dragon's abdomen. Even if such a legendary equipment did not fit him, he still had to wear it.
Easily pierced the
He
red
wondered
dragon's
how much
body,
it could increase
as
his
if it
combat
had no
power.
defensive dragon
It fits
scales
just
at all.
right. Then he
Gloria
found that when
nodded
he
with
attacked
satisfaction,
he just
subconsciously
appeared on the
stabbed
corner
gap
of her
between
mouth.
the red dragon's
Soren
scales.
moved a little and
The
found that it
dragon's
was
scales
indeed
were
quite
not a
fitting.
complete hole.
It basically
They
did
were
not
solid
affect his
scales,
combat
and
power.
each scale had a
But
small
when he
gap.
was about to say
It was
something,
useless
the
to
whole
pierce through
wizard
them
tower
from the
suddenly
front.
shook,
But
and
he
then
could
it shook
attack
a
the
little.
part where the
In an
dragon's
instant,
scales were connected
both
by
Soren and
following the
Gloria
slope.
reacted quickly.
This was something that
Gloria's
Soren could not
figure
do in the
almost
past.
disappeared in an instant,
Because he did not
and
have
then
such
she appeared
superb
near the
skills
window
to be able to
At the
maintain
same
such
time,
amazing
a
accuracy
magic
at the
aura
moment of
appeared on
launching
her
an
body.
explosive attack.
It seemed that she had
But he seemed to have
activated
done
more
it
than
now.
3 protective
Soren
energy
not only
fields.
did it, but when
Soren's
he clenched his
reaction was
curved
not too
sword
far
and stabbed
away.
it through the gap
The
between the
legendary
dragon's
curved
scales,
sword icing
he
death
also felt the
instantly
touch
appeared
of the
in his
sword.
palm.
He
And
broke
then he
through
leaped
the
to the
tough
left
dragon
side of the
skin
room,
and pierced into the
holding the
muscle
sword
layer
with
of the
both
red
hands
dragon
to protect Gloria's
After
side.
piercing through the
It
muscle
had to be
layer,
said.
the curved
At this
sword
moment,
he clenched
their
seemed to have
cooperation
become
was
his
quite good.
fingers.
The
The
wizard
touch from
tower
the
was
blade
still
let him
shaking
know that it was
slightly.
close to the muscle
Whether it was
ligament.
Gloria or
A
Soren,
living creature's
they could not
body was
help
made
but
up
look
of pieces of
dignified.
muscle, because now
Muscle
the whole
also
wizard
had a
tower
strong
was shaking a
defensive
little,
ability,
and dust
but at
was
the place
trembling
where
from the
each piece of
ceiling.
muscle was connected,
Both of them were
its
quite clear
defensive
about the
ability was
defensive
quite
ability
weak.
of the wizard
Butcher
tower.
Ding dissects
For
an
such a
ox.
situation to
This
happen,
was the
it was
only
definitely
analogy
a big
that Soren
deal.
could think of.
It's not an
Butcher
enemy
Ding
attack.
was most familiar with
A crystal
cows,
ball
but
appeared
Soren
in
was
Gloria's
most
palm.
familiar with his sword.
She gently touched
Curved
it,
sword,
then frowned
legendary.
and said, "It's a
Critical
vibration
strike
from the
multiplier
ground.
+1,
Earthquake?
critical strike
Soren
+1.
looked at Gloria in confusion. Both of their expressions were a little strange. Was it really an earthquake? But just when they were puzzled, the wizard tower shook more violently. The blade cut a strong magic aura, and Soren actually felt very smooth. Astrology platform. It felt like he was chopping firewood with a knife. The Eye of the North he used to cut horizontally, which Gloria reached out and touched a crystal button on her chest. But now he was chopping vertically, and then a white light appeared in her force of gravity and the path of the wood itself. Figure appeared on the top of the astrology platform. 3 inches deep into the red dragon's body before it lost its strength. Soren looked at the city in the distance. But now Soren had stabbed nearly a part of the city wall was cracked, and at the same time, this was definitely a large-scale earthquake. To put it simply, of the earthquake had almost cut off a piece of houses in the distant city pounds from the red dragon's but there were not many casualties in the scattered villages. The red dragon let out a painful roar and straw, which was even more painful than when it was hit by a round of spells from the northern witches. Soren could see people gathering together in a panic like ants from the dragon. Gloria, and damage spells could activate the magic protection of the dragon's scales. A hoarse and old female voice appeared on the astrology platform. People had mentioned the elemental tide more than once. There was a white-haired cited a large number of changes in pure blood dragons to prove the impact of the elemental tide on other creatures. Soren had a certain impression dragons could be as long as she was the strongest witch in the north. Some of the dragons who had lived for quite a long time could clearly see the greater impact of time on their command. Gloria theory eventually magic array on the wizard tower without hesitation. 300 to 500 years later, a beam of light shot into the sky. Some people suspected that this would lead to the rise of the Dragon Island. 3 beams. In the witches' formation began to see beams of light. They did not come with their real bodies, so they only retained intertwined with each other of their strength. It seemed to be a mysterious level, and the strength of the spells were much lower than the strength of the real magic lock. A wizard's projection could retain about 70% of their strength. It was still daytime, although there was a full moon in the combat power was stronger. Under the light of the full moon, retain about all the beams of light formed a magic lock. It was said that the arcane empire used to have a powerful spell called Simulacrum. This was a legendary magic lock, retain more than 90% of the combat power of the witch council. But this spell had been lost. It was a magic lock inherited in the destruction of the arcane empire. Many spells were lost, especially those from other planets. Soren remembered that it had killed a weak wizard like Soren. But the reduction in strength was not activated because he did not have many spell slots to begin with. Activate the magic lock. All he could do was throw out arcane missiles once and for all. Quite serious. Moreover, the soul projection of the rogue class did not reduce that in a hoarse voice. It only slightly affected basic skills and various aspects. All members of the Witch Council above grade 4 entering the astral plane had the least impact on him. He retained most of his attribute points in his soul projection state, world gate, and it just so happened that Soren's battle power was largely supported by his attribute in the center of the magic circle. A whistling gust of wind and all the wizard towers were included in the protection of the magic lock. Scales and dealt quite a shadow of damage to the red dragon. The soul projection of the Eye of the North was like a female giant in the sky. At first glance, it was probably thousands of meters high, dare just like the legendary magic transformation. So he quickly pulled out his scimitar and retreated. When he pulled out his scimitar, of the huge large amount of dragon blood rays of magic light also appeared. The boiling dragon soul shadows began to appear around her. The red dragon's legendary witch who had existed for hundreds of years. It was like boiling water. She cast a legendary spell with every move. This kind of injury would not have had time to recover from his dazzling change, but it made his body tremble. Gloria next to him also walking to the center of the light. He could only rely on his strong dexterity and flexibility to twist his body and soul into the astral world. He then flew up and landed
still
a kick on the side
witch,
of the red dragon,
a high-grade member
because
of the
the
witch
tail was
council.
raised. He saw
Now
a
even
huge
the Eye of the
chrysanthemum.
North was alarmed.
He had to admit
Something
that the
big must have
excretory
happened in the
organs of the
astral
giant
world.
dragon were
At
not
this
much
moment,
different from other creatures.
Soren almost didn't think
However,
much about it.
this should be one of
He
the
reached
few
out and
places that
grabbed
was
her
not
arm.
protected by
He
dragon
wanted to
scales.
tell Gloria how
The giant
dangerous the
dragon's
astral
excrement
world
was a very
but when he
useful
saw
tool in the
Gloria's
wild.
determined eyes,
It could
he could
repel
only
other
sigh
wild
helplessly.
monsters, so they would not
However,
dare to
when
encroach
Gloria
and
thought
attack
that Soren would
adventurers.
let go of his
Since
hand
there was
and let her
giant
go,
dragon's
she
excrement,
didn't
they also
expect
had
that Soren
excretory
actually held
organs.
her palm.
For any
The two
creatures,
people's
this
fingers
place
were
was
interlocked.
considered a critical spot.
Under Gloria's surprised
Usually
and
it was
moved
protected
expression,
by the dragon's
Soren
tail,
stepped
so
into
there was
the light
basically
beam
no
that
chance to
connected to the
attack it.
astral world gate.
However, when the red
bodies
dragon
of the
swept
people
its tail at
froze at
Soren's
this moment.
body, it
Then
created
two
a hole
souls
in his
appeared
defense
outside
that
the body,
lasted for about
turned
a
into
second
a
and
ray
a
of
half,
light,
and
Soren,
went straight to
who
the
had never
astral
talked
world
about
gate.
any honorable means,
Since she had made up her mind to go to the astral world
after seeing that
Soren
the
could
enemy
only
had
expose
accompanied
the
her.
area without
P.S.
the protection of
I need
dragon
to organize
scales.
the information.
When he
The
subconsciously
astral
stabbed
world
into
will
the
be
enemy's
different.
body with his
That's all
curved
for
sword,
today.
he realized that the position he attacked was quite special.
Damn it.
This
Chapter
red dragon was
312.
actually a female.
It was a wonderful
The
feeling
enemy's
to have
gender
one's
did
soul
not
leave
affect
one's
Soren's
body.
battle sense.
Although it wasn't the
when the
first
red
time
dragon
Soren
let
tried
out
to
an
project his
earth-shattering
soul
roar
out of his
and turned
body,
its head to
it
spit
was the
dragon's
first time
breath
he
at
tried
him.
it in the real
Soren
world.
had already
The
retreated
strongest
into the
feeling was
shadows
the
and
weightlessness
activated
of
the
his
shadow
soul.
dancer's new
Without
ability,
the shackles of
shadow
gravity,
leap.
his soul
This was a
felt
common
light.
ability for
However,
rogues,
it wasn't
but
a shadow
complete
dancer's
souls that
mastered
mastered
it
it earlier.
earlier.
The
If
moment
it was a
it touched
purebred
the light
rogue,
beam,
it might be around
Soren's
the level
soul
of a
was molded into a
quasi-legendary.
soul projection.
This was a
and sent
very
directly
important
to the astral
prerequisite
gate.
skill, and
The
it was
soul
the most
projection
important
was only a
escape
part
and
of the
pursuit
soul.
skill for rogues.
It wasn't the weight
It
of
was
a
a little
complete soul,
different from
so if it
shadow
died,
jump.
it wouldn't necessarily
Shadow
cause the
leap,
body in the real
supernatural
world to die
ability.
as well. As the
However,
rogue's
it would
connection with the
definitely
shadow
cause a
plane
terrible
becomes
amount of
closer
damage
and
to the
closer.
soul.
They begin
If
to
the damage
master
was
the
too great,
mysterious shadow
it could
leap
turn the
ability.
person into an
They can
idiot or
shuttle
even
and
jump
affect
in
the
the
real
shadows,
world, just like the
causing
wizard's
the
existence
existence
of the
of
soul
spell.
projection to
This
die on the
shadow
spot.
leap ability does
This
not
could be
require
understood
them to
simply
enter
according
stealth.
to the east.
As long as they
If
are
the
in the
soul
shadows,
projection
rogues
died,
can
it
perform
would be
shadow
like the
leap.
scattering of
This
a part
jump
of the
distance
three
is up to
souls in
100
some
meters
spirits in Eastern
but it can be
mythology.
divided into
It was
any number of
possible for the
times.
projection to
Before
become
mastering
crazy
a special
or
advanced
directly become an
ability,
idiot. The limit of
it was
shadow
even
leap in a
possible
day
for
is
the
100
projection to
meters.
become a vegetable or die on the spot.
Normally, this kind of soul projection
Note,
would only be
this
used in
ability can be
extremely
used 10
dangerous
times.
places.
Each jump
It could
a
also be
distance of
used
10
in
meters.
places where the physical
It can also
body
be
couldn't
used
reach.
once.
This
Each
would
jump
greatly
distance
reduce
of
the
100
cost of
meters.
death. Their
This
souls
was the
were
legendary
remolded into
shadow
half-energy
leap.
bodies.
It was a
The
more
power of the
flexible
soul
and useful
projection was
ability than
greatly
shadow
reduced.
jump.
Soren
It did
only
not
kept
require
about
them to enter
80% of
stealth.
his strength,
They only needed
and
to
all
be
of
in
his
the
equipment
shadows.
below
Then
legendary
they could
level
launch
was
a
left
jump
on his
ability
body.
similar to
This was
anywhere
the
door
reason
and
why
being
he
didn't
didn't
like
like
to go to the
epidemic
epidemic
gate.
dimensional anchor.
Low-tier rare
However,
items
this
couldn't be
supernatural
converted
ability
into
had a
half-energy.
weakness.
That
Only
was,
legendary
its limit was
equipment and
100
above could be
meters.
converted into
Unless
soul
they
projection,
mastered a very
and it would
special
be left
ability,
on the soul
they could only
projection
jump
after
a
death.
distance of 100
Therefore,
meters at
even
most.
legendary wizards
From this
wouldn't
point
bring
of
their
view,
strongest
shadow
legendary
leap was
equipment with them
completely
when they were in the
inferior
soul
to the
projection
legendary
state.
skill, shadow
However,
step,
Soren
because the
couldn't leave
latter
his
had
equipment
greater
on his
freedom
body.
and greater lethality.
All of his legendary
In fact,
equipment would
Soren
directly
had been
affect his
considering
combat
whether
ability.
to upgrade the
Going to
profession
the
level of
astral
rogues
gate
or
without
wizards.
legendary equipment
One
would
was
be
the current
suicide.
combat power,
A brief
the other
moment
was
of
the future
dizziness.
combat potential.
When Soren and Gloria
Boom.
regained their
The fierce
consciousness,
flame was like
they
an
were already
explosion.
in front of the
Soren
astral
only
gate.
jumped about 15
At this
meters.
moment, there were about
Shadow
12
leap
soul
could only
projections
be
gathered
used in the
around the
shadows
eye
that
of the
he could
north.
see.
When
Only
these
those
soul
above the
projections
legendary
noticed Soren's
levels could
appearance,
feel the invisible
they couldn't
shadows.
help but show a trace
Soren's
of
thin
surprise on
figure
their
disappeared
faces.
in the shadows
They then
and
looked at
reappeared
Gloria
in
in
confusion.
confusion.
In a
When
flash,
they saw the
he
expression
completely
on her
avoided
face,
the dragon's
the other
breath.
witches couldn't
In
help
fact,
but
the
smile
gap between
mischievously.
rogues and wizards
It
was
seemed like
gradually
Gloria
narrowing
was
since
quite
they
popular,
entered the higher
unlike
grade.
her mother who wasn't
Otherwise, they
likable.
would not be second
All of the
only to
witches
the sword
present
saint
were
and have
high-grade
the ability
adepts,
to
and
assassinate
at least
wizards.
a third of them were
Soren relied on
quasi-legendary
many
adepts.
supernatural abilities to deal with wizards in the past.
As for witches like changes on the battlefield were ever-changing, whose profession level was around level 25, northern witches seemed to be a bit estimated that there were not many witches like her in the whole world, constantly remove magic the most powerful one among all warriors to attack the enemy. If that was the case, this caused a lot of trouble for the northern among the soul projections. If they did not continuously buff their defensive energy field, Soren's arrival, they would be easily exposed to the attack range of the psionic warriors. She just glanced at him for a moment. However, once they continuously buffed their defensive spells, they would fall into a passive situation of a war of attrition because there would always be a moment when the had already been opened suddenly enveloped the fragile body of wizards was doomed to be difficult to support for a long time without the buff of the countless light spots because the ones attacking them were all shuttled back and forth from the astral plane. Therefore, the only thing that could be seen with the naked eye was many rainbow-like rays of light. The silver blade and slashed with the simplest way that exhausted her defensive spells. Many abyss demons and hell devils would remember one-third of travel to other spells at most, so when her defensive spells were used up, it would only counterattack by throwing a large number of control spells, it wouldn't cause the death of the soul projection in front of her. However, without the protection of the energy field, therefore, her existence was quite fragile and became the target of many psionic warriors. The other witches to go to the astral gate with their bodies. The feeling of a soul passing through a membrane blade was flowing with silver cold light. Or it should be said that it was a bit like a person sinking into the sea. The northern witch. When Soren opened his eyes again, he was already standing on a very barren land. The northern witch would almost exhausted all her defensive spells around. Suddenly seemed to trigger was like standing on the surface of the moon and looking at the universe. And then she waved her staff to block the psionic warrior in front of her. In front of him was a boundless silver river, strength, like the Milky Way where countless stars gathered. No matter from which point of view, it was almost impossible for the northern witch to block the attack of an advanced warrior, as well as objects that were streaking past at high speed like meteors. Polymorph. It could be just a psionic warrior in front of her seemed to realize something. The astral gate had become a huge garbage dump. The northern witch, who looked very delicate in front of him, people had entered here and died staff and broke one of his arms on the spot. There were also all kinds of existences that entered the astral gate for other reasons. The scene was simply horrible. The astral gate had completely turned into a huge garbage dump. The strength of the witch had reached about 20 points because she almost smashed the opponent's hidden half-planes. Everyone who saw this could not help but frown. And even broken floating fortresses, huge astral warships, saw this scene by accident. Almost everything you could think of could be found here. Polymorph, because this was a huge and all-encompassing garbage dump. The dragon breath was also the most dangerous garbage dump. I didn't expect there to be a combat wizard. There was no air in the astral gate, so it was not easy for flesh and blood to survive. Combat wizard. They had to rely on the half-planes floating in the astral gate. They mainly focused on polymorph spells. For example, at a lower level, who entered the astral gate were soul projections in a semi-energy state, spiders, or powerful existences that were directly close to the form of a saint. At a higher level, they could learn Tansen's polymorph. In this endless astral gate, there was a combat power of a warrior. Wizards called it source substance. In the future, they could also learn a variety of special polymorph spells, however, as well as legendary spells that could transform into giants, dark energy, demons, and other creatures. Almost all half-planes must be connected to the astral gate, and especially after the destruction of the Arcane Empire, very special there were fewer that was difficult to explain in high-grade polymorph spells. However, one thing that could be easily understood was that even legendary wizards could not provide the huge amount of energy needed to open up a 20 points. Therefore, all half-planes grew little by little. +5. This was very similar to the divine military weapons, but the energy for the growth of half-planes the same level from two places of spellcasting. One was the astral gate. The other was the ether plane. I only got home at 10:30. These two planes had an inexplicable relationship. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock. And the structure of energy was also unknown. However, the astral gate was closer to the outer plane, while the ether plane was closer to the inner plane. Chapter 321. Soren was standing on a half-plane. Shadow leap. Because there were very few material structures inside the astral gate, physical damage, there was almost no doubt that most of the material damage to the red dragon from other planes. So the red dragon in front of him seemed to be about to go berserk. Even the half-plane under Soren's fire was a red dragon's piece of garbage floating in the red dragon became violent, waving its tail and sweeping around. Without the support of this dragon blood oozed out and the other wishes near the excretory organ directly exposed to the dragon wings set off gusts of wind, which was the silver torrent above their heads. Not only was a more troublesome thing because this torrent of energy generated from the distorted space would have many dangerous astral gate creatures living in sight. Even the gods might not once again disappear into the shadows, but they knew how to use the energy of the astral gate. Increased the number of the original creation of the world was made as long as he kept a certain distance. It would be difficult to lock his position even if someone wanted to use detection. He could not remember much, but he knew that outside the torrent of energy that was like the Milky Way, which was an endless amount of dark energy and something called the crystal wall. However, the red dragon obviously didn't have such a high level of casting. A lot of data Soren had been quietly watching the berserk red dragon while waiting for the next opportunity to attack. Soul entered the astral gate. Dragon must not be rushed because any creature could not withstand a heavy blow from them. Soul came into contact with the situation of the northern witches seemed to be a bit bad. You've received some information about the epic high-grade witches were about to be used up, traveler, and the spell slots of the wizards were never that abundant. Epic background. Even legendary wizards had to be careful when using spells. Soul structure completed. The human wave tactic was the most effective transformed into dark energy. Unless the wizard intended to use teleportation to escape, sooner or later, they would run out of spell slots. In the past, such a powerful blade master was also a wizard, but in the end, his spell slots were used up. In the end, a group of people exhausted him to death. The casualties of the Githyanki's were close to 100. One of the northern witches seemed to have died, and another was in a bit of a dangerous situation. Fortunately, Gloria was fine. She had been staying near the Eye of the North and basically the psionic warriors could not threaten her for the time being. However, if this dragged on, the situation would be a little bad. No one knew what the Eye of the North was thinking. Even at this time, she still hadn't started preparing a legendary spell. A high-grade witch like Gloria could only cast level 8 spells in her soul projection state. Moreover, she would only have 1 or 2 spell slots at most. Perhaps it could cause quite a bit of damage to the enemy, but it was absolutely impossible to turn the situation around. The only one who could turn the situation around was the Eye of the North and an elderly witch with a lot of white hair. She was also a legendary witch with a profession level of 21. Bang! A violent muffled sound came from behind. The sound was like a meatball being shot out. Then everyone found that a middle-aged witch who was besieged by the Githyanki suddenly began to swell violently, and then her body underwent tremendous changes in an instant. Her height had increased to nearly 7 meters, and her whole body was covered with strong muscles. Her heavy chest was like a pair of big meatballs. Clear and heavy footprints appeared on the ground. The middle-aged witch, who had turned into a giant in an instant, roared and punched down, smashing a Githyanki's into a meat patty. Frost Giant Transformation. Level 9 Spell. Heavy footsteps sounded on the battlefield. The female Frost Giant, who was nearly 2 stories tall, slowly stood up. Her body seemed to be surrounded by cold air, and her strong muscles were full of explosive power. Although it seemed a bit unsightly to be naked, no one could ignore the terrible power in her body. That was the breath of a legendary creature. Frost Giants were legendary creatures comparable to dragons. They were humanoid creatures close to the peak of power on the earth. This time it was not only Soren who was surprised. Even the other witches nearby, including Gloria in the battle, showed a shocked expression and murmured, "Has Witch Paisley cracked the spell scroll of the legendary transformation spell? It seems that she has successfully advanced into a legendary battle wizard." A wizard. Of course, it was not a group of people who only knew how to cast spells. There were also quite different and violent spells among the wizards. Battle wizards who could transform were the best among them. They could transform into beasts, monsters, insects, golems, dragons, demons, devils, and so on. If there was a battle, in addition to the original spells, they could also transform into various creatures according to the environment to deal with the enemy and special geographical environment. The Frost Giant transformation in front of them was a level 9 spell, which belonged to legendary creatures. However, the complete version seemed to have more than one kind of transformation. Eye of the North also looked at the middle-aged witch who had transformed into a huge female Frost Giant. She frowned slightly and thought for a moment, then said in a deep voice, "Not good." She didn't completely crack the transformation spell. The complete transformation spell should be able to transform into other legendary creatures every minute. It seems that she can only transform into a Frost Giant. It seems that she can't control herself. Naturally, the spells of wizards were also very dangerous. Among them, the most representative was the transformation spell. The low-grade transformation spell had a test of death every time it changed. It could cause irreparable damage or lead to death in the process of transformation. Therefore, any shape-shifting battle wizard that appeared were basically high-grade spellcasters. At that time, their shape-shifting spells would be much safer. The middle-aged witch who had transformed into a Frost Giant did not seem to have cast the complete spell because the complete version of the transformation spell seemed to be able to transform into quasi-legendary creatures such as steel golems, 6-armed snake demons, horned devils, and so on. Roar! Eye of the North's judgment was not wrong. The female Frost Giant's eyes began to show an uncontrollable look. Her expression gradually became frantic, and even the summoned creatures nearby began to attack. It had to be said that the 7-meter-tall Frost Giant was really lethal. The behemoth in front of them killed 7 or 8 summoned elementals in one breath. At the same time, it also cleaned up the nearby Githyankis. With the combat power of the adult Frost Giant, even if it did not have any advanced profession, it was enough to cause crushing damage to many people present just by relying on eating and sleeping to grow up. The female Frost Giant violently attacked all around, trampling a Githyankis who had no time to dodge into a meat patty. Then she saw the adult red dragon in front of her who was also a little violent. As a result, without the slightest hesitation, she let out a low roar and directly threw herself at him. Boom! An invisible wave of air spread in all directions. When the female Frost Giant rushed over, the red dragon also noticed the huge enemy in front of it. So it did not hesitate to launch a dragon wing attack. It directly flapped its powerful dragon wings, trying to get rid of the enemy in front of it. But a very surprising scene happened. The female Frost Giant suddenly opened her arms and grabbed the strong dragon wings of the red dragon. At the same time, she arched her body to bear all the power of the dragon. Dang dang dang. The female Frost Giant took 3 steps back in a row, but she was not sent flying by the dragon's wings, nor was she knocked into a coma. The opposing superhuman strength caused the surrounding sand and stones to tremble. Then, at the moment of the collision, the 2 forces that were close to the limit of the material plane directly caused the ground under their feet to tremble. Then, cracks that could be seen with the naked eye appeared. The Frost Giant was not the hill giant that was likely to be encountered in the wilderness. According to the comparison of the combat power of the two sides, a frost giant could fight at least 10 hill giants. The gap between them was as obvious as that between the red dragon and the white dragon. In terms of size, the adult red dragon undoubtedly had the advantage, so even if the strength of the two sides was not much different, the female frost giant obviously showed signs of being suppressed. But the next scene was a bit unbelievable. The female frost giant grabbed the dragon wings of the red dragon with both hands, then turned around and threw it over her shoulder. With a height of more than 7 meters, it was not difficult for her to use such a move on the adult red dragon. Then everyone saw the huge red dragon, which weighed dozens of tons, was directly thrown out by her. As a wizard, she was also proficient in close combat. Bang! The red dragon's huge body smashed into the ground, creating a crater. When two creatures of the same size fought, there was no obvious crushing effect. The female frost giant was not afraid of the red dragon at all. This time she successfully took the initiative to counterattack, then turned around and rushed over, raising her millstone-sized fist and smashing the red dragon's head. Good chance. Soren, who had been wandering around the periphery, would not let go of such a good opportunity. When the red dragon's body was thrown out, he was already quickly approaching. So when the female frost giant raised her millstone-sized fist and smashed the red dragon's head, Soren held his curved sword tightly and stabbed into the red dragon's leg joint. The difference in size in a battle was very obvious. Soren's attack on the red dragon was like using an embroidery needle to stab a certain part of an adult's body. Even if the wound was bleeding, it was limited. So Soren's piercing attack was painful, but the damage was not necessarily fatal. On the contrary, the huge frost giant's fist hit the red dragon's head, and immediately, it was like an adult fighting with a fist on the red dragon's eye socket. In an instant, the whole eye socket was swollen and bruised, and even the eye socket was directly smashed open. Ouch! The red dragon was hit by the frost giant's fist and was directly smashed to the ground. This was also because there were no frost giant weapons on the battlefield. If the frost giant was given a full set of plate armor and a weapon that weighed more than a ton, she would be unbeatable in a crowd. Perhaps this adult red dragon might not be able to withstand a few hits, but there was certainly no condition for that battle now. Most of the time, wizards won because they were well prepared, and they died because they were not well prepared, sudden encounters. Some battles were difficult to be perfect. Chapter 322. Sword form, spinning strike. Sword form, horizontal slash. Shadow strike. What should Soren do when the red dragon was pinned to the ground by the frost giant? Without a doubt, he must take advantage of this time to cause as much damage to the enemy as possible, and then drag the red dragon into a state of serious injury. The vitality of the dragon was quite amazing. Although it had been fighting for a long time, in fact, it was just approaching the state of serious injury. However, Soren did not get close to the upper body of the red dragon because he believed that the most powerful red dragon would not be so weak. It would not be unable to fight back after a round of attacks from the frost giant. Besides, its big head could bite people. Roar! Shrill screams sounded at the same time. There was an adult red dragon that was seriously injured by Soren, and there was also a female frost giant that was attacked. Her arm was directly bitten by the red dragon. Even though the frost giants had strong natural armor, their bones and skin were almost bitten off. The bite force of the dragon was quite amazing. In fact, because of their many abilities in other aspects, it was easy to ignore the bite force of the dragon. However, Soren naturally remembered how fatal the bite of the dragon was because one of his arms was bitten off in the past. In the end, he could only ask a high-grade priest to cast limb restoration. The attack of the female frost giant was finally interrupted. The red dragon opened its mouth and bit the female frost giant tightly. At the same time, it struggled to turn over its huge dragon body and get up. With their huge size, the battle scene was a bit like the battle of the dinosaurs in the Jurassic era, and it was the battle between the Tyrannosaurus rex and the Spinosaurus. When the two sides fought, the earth shook and the mountains shook. If Soren was accidentally stepped on by any one of them, he could be seriously injured or even killed on the spot. Because Soren could not bear dozens of tons of weight. Poochie. A large amount of dragon blood flowed out. Soren's expression was serious as he waved his curved sword and pierced it. At the same time, he carefully avoided the sweeping tail of the dragon and the twisting body of the red dragon. Without a specialized dragon-slaying weapon, it would definitely be inconvenient to fight against a giant dragon. Whether it was the dragon-slaying sword or the dragon-slaying spear, They were all specially designed legendary equipment that could effectively attack the vital organs of a giant dragon. Unlike Soren's attack, it was difficult for him to damage the dragon's internal organs due to the length of his weapon. However, he wasn't completely helpless. Soren swung his scimitar and sliced open the scales of the red dragon. Then he cut into the enemy's body through the muscle tissue and severed the red dragon's tendons. A row of data appeared. Battle experience. You comprehended something during the battle. Grasped partial information of the combat skill sword form, tendon break. Battle experience. You comprehended something during the battle. Grasped some information about the combat skill sword form, split. 2 consecutive data prompts appeared. However, Soren didn't have time to look at it at this time because he relied on his powerful curved sword, legendary, ability to successfully pierce the red dragon's body, cut off the dragon tendons very accurately, and cut the blood vessels of the red dragon's legs. He couldn't do this kind of attack in the past because he didn't have such accuracy when he attacked in the past. However, now that he had the legendary, curved sword, his attacks on the enemy became more accurate and deadly. Sword form, tendon break. Combat skill. Through special combat skills, you can sever the tendons of the enemy's hands and feet in battle. It can greatly reduce the combat ability of ordinary enemies. It is also very effective against some supernatural creatures. The enemy must undergo a mandatory constitution test. Otherwise they may be paralyzed, disabled, and other negative statuses. Sword form, split. Combat skill. Through special combat skills, you can sever the enemy's blood vessels in battle. This will cause the enemy's bleeding status to worsen, and they may die from excessive blood loss in a short period of time. Boiling dragon blood splattered all over the ground. Soren's whole body was covered in blood. When he severed the red dragon's tendons, he also severed one of its arteries. Although supernatural creatures with strong vitality wouldn't die quickly because of this, it would worsen their bleeding status. Soren's dragon blood spurted out because he accurately hit the arteries. He clenched his curved sword and exerted force along the muscles of the red dragon's leg. In just a few seconds he cut off more than 300 pounds of dragon meat. The scene was a little horrifying. Soren's sword cut through pieces of flesh and blood. In the end, the bones of the red dragon's leg could be seen. It was as if it was almost skinned alive by Soren. The frost giant seemed to have recovered a little from the red dragon's attack. As a northern witch who was close to the legendary level, she decisively chose to cut off her arm that was bitten by the red dragon. Then she used her other remaining arm to choke the red dragon's neck. At the same time she turned over and rode on the red dragon's neck. This was the weak point of its strength. When the red dragon's long and narrow neck was pressed down, it wouldn't be easy for it to turn over. It was as if she had grasped the weak spot of a snake. Soren seemed to have entered a very wonderful state. It couldn't be said that he had a breakthrough, but he did have a lot of improvement in his combat skills. A row of data prompts appeared again. Combat experience. You have gained enlightenment in the battle. You have mastered part of the combat skill sword form, tendon break. Combat experience. You have gained enlightenment in the battle. You have mastered part of the combat skill sword form, split. Combat experience. You have gained enlightenment in the battle. You have successfully mastered the combat skill sword form, spinning strike. Bang. The thick and long dragon tail whipped over with a whistling wind, and then directly wrapped around the frost giant's neck with amazing flexibility, and then pulled her down on the spot. The red dragon roared angrily, and a pair of dragon wings flapped out on the spot. At the same time it turned over and tried to get up. The challenge rating of an adult frost giant was the same as that of a young dragon, so sometimes in the wild, frost giants could be encountered fighting with dragons, but most of them were white dragons that belonged to the same cold region. It was not rare for giants and dragons to fight. Therefore, the red dragon's brain also had inherited the combat skills of dealing with giants. After it shook off the frost giant, it took a deep breath, and then suddenly opened its mouth and spat out a scorching dragon breath. The power of frost filled the air. The scorching flames were raging. The attributes of the frost giant and the red dragon were opposite. When they collided, even the elemental power in the air fluctuated violently. The red dragon struggled to stand up. But suddenly, its body shook again and its huge body staggered and almost fell to the ground. At this time, the others realized that more than 500 pounds of flesh and blood had been cut off from the right thigh of the red dragon. Half of the dragon's leg was exposed to the white bones. The whole battle lasted less than a minute. The red dragon felt the pain of being attacked, but it never thought that the enemy would cause it so much damage. Soren was dismembering the red dragon. Although he wasn't able to deliver a fatal blow, he dismembered one of the red dragon's legs and used the sword form, spinning strike, twice on the dragon's wings. Brr, brr, bang. The red dragon flapped its huge dragon wings, trying to regain its balance. Unfortunately, half of its leg was a skeleton. Clang. The curved sword in Soren's hand slashed across the air. As his figure moved around the red dragon, the wounds on its leg increased. Large pieces of flesh and blood were cut off, and the sturdy dragon scales seemed to have lost their function. They were accurately cut open by Soren again and again. Some wounds only needed to be torn open, and the next thing to do was to make the wound bigger. Therefore, when Soren's second round of attacks ended, large pieces of white bones could be seen on the red dragon's leg. Most creatures that relied on wings to fly would kick their legs before they took off. Therefore, the legendary experts could reduce the force of a bird's kick and make it unable to fly out of the palm of their hands. Although the red dragon could barely stand, it was quite difficult for it to fly again. His body was a little shaky. A lot of blood loss, Soren's damage, and the frost giant's attacks had gradually dragged it to the brink of death. Chapter 323. The red dragon was in a state of near death. Soren's attacks became more and more cautious. He even opened up a distance and then disappeared into the shadows again. Only the frost giant and the red dragon continued to fight each other. Soren needed to get the last hit. Only when he ended the red dragon's life could he gain a lot of slaughter EXP. The red dragon gave the highest slaughter EXP among all the dragon species. It was estimated to be about twice as much as an adult white dragon. It was enough for Soren to level up his wizard profession by about 2 levels, or to level up his shadow dancer profession by 1 level. The slaughter EXP from slaying a dragon was quite amazing. The red dragon's breath gradually weakened, and the frost giant's condition was not very good. The nearby Githyanki's tried to help the red dragon, but they were all blocked by Gloria. The northern witches obviously realized that if they killed the red dragon first, the pressure they had to bear would be reduced a lot. At least, they would not have to worry about the dangerous red dragon's wings. The northern witches, who had activated Tan Sen's transformation, even stood in front of the red dragon and waved their staffs like high-grade warriors. When a wizard reached this level, they were not afraid of close combat. Although she had lost the ability to cast spells, there were other witches nearby who gave her protection spells. For a moment, she blocked 3 to 5 Githyanki's by herself. The opportunity Soren had been waiting for finally appeared. When the red dragon's head showed an obvious flaw, Soren's figure flew out. He directly jumped a distance of nearly 50 meters in the shadows and instantly appeared under the shadow of the red dragon's neck. He then jumped and stabbed the red dragon's huge eyeball with his sword. With a splash of blood and penetrating the red dragon's eyeball, Soren's curved sword directly sank into the red dragon's brain. The red dragon's huge body trembled for a moment, and then it shook its head violently. Soren was sure that he had stabbed into the red dragon's head, and he might have even hurt its brain. However, the fact that the red dragon did not die under such circumstances could only mean one thing. Its incomparably powerful vitality allowed it to survive the judgment of death. Damn it! Soren didn't expect the enemy's vitality to be so tenacious. His body swayed in the air with the dragon's head, and he didn't have the strength to pull out his curved sword icing death. So he could only let go of his hands and let his body fall. At the same time, he held the silver sword of Gith +3 with both hands at the moment of falling. Then he jumped up when he touched the ground, holding the sword with both hands and slashing at the neck of the red dragon. Clang! The silver blade of Gith was stuck in the neck of the red dragon. Without transforming into a slaughterer, Soren's sword form, Behead, couldn't cut off the neck of the red dragon. Large amounts of boiling dragon blood spilled out. This attack seemed to have severely injured the red dragon again. Even though there was still no judgment of death, the red dragon's life force was gradually fading. Its struggling body became weaker and weaker, and finally, it fell to the ground with a thud, its head falling limply to the ground. The boiling dragon blood spilled all over Soren's body. The dragon blood, which was far hotter than the white dragon's, seemed to be roasting him. Soren could even feel his skin cracking as if he had fallen into magma. Activated sword form, Behead. You've dealt 42 points of critical damage to the target. Behead failed. You've successfully killed an adult red dragon. Extracting the target's soul energy. You've gained 118,000 slaughter EXP. A hot breath flowed in Soren's body. Close to 120,000 slaughter EXP gave him the ability to level up his profession again, but he didn't have the energy to do so for the time being because he did feel like he had fallen into magma. He was hot. It was so hot that he felt like he was being roasted on a fire. This burning pain was a little unbearable even for Soren's will. He couldn't help but groan in pain, and his whole body was trembling on the ground. There was a flame burning on his body. It was a real flame, a flame ignited by the blood of the red dragon, a flame from the heart of the red dragon. Soren's whole body seemed to be burning, and his HP was constantly decreasing. If he continued to progress like this, he might directly be burned to a crisp. The dragon blood baptism seemed to be close to failure. With Soren's vitality and will, there were signs that he couldn't withstand the blood baptism of the red dragon. Finally, he seemed to remember something. Soren almost staggered a little as he rushed to the dragon's head, and then pulled out his curved sword, icing death. A cold breath filled the air. The flame on Soren's body seemed to have awakened icing death as consciousness, and it began to automatically extinguish any nearby flames. The fire of the red dragon on Soren's body gradually subsided. His whole body was almost burned beyond recognition, and his skin was scorched. He didn't know if it was considered to have completed the dragon blood baptism. After all, this was only his soul projection state. A row of data appeared. You've accepted the dragon blood baptism ceremony. You've gained part of your ability. You've inherited part of the dragon's ability. Baptism successful. You've gained additional background ability, Dragon Blood Baptism LV2. Dragon Blood Baptism LV2, special ability. You've successfully killed an adult red dragon. After completing this dragon slaying feat, you've undergone a second dragon blood baptism. This baptism has strengthened your body and allowed you to inherit part of the red dragon's ability. The dragon blood has made you stronger. You've inherited part of the strongest red dragon among the pentashade dragons. At the same time, because of the effect of the red dragon's blood, you've permanently gained 10 points of fire resistance. Innate armor +1, toughness +2, fire resistance +10. Note, because of the dragon blood baptism in the soul projection state, part of the dragon's ability cannot be obtained. Finally, the red dragon was killed. Soren slowly stood up. He now looked like he had suffered a level 10 burn, and was basically completely unrecognizable. However, his aura was quite amazing. Just now, after successfully slaying the dragon, his spirit had reached its peak state. It felt like a hidden sword for 10 years, unsheathed in one day feeling. His completely burned face didn't affect his aura at all. On the contrary, it made him more dangerous and deadly. This aura. If it was during normal times, it would make people feel dangerous and repulsed. But now, in Gloria's eyes, it represented a sense of security. It made her feel that as long as Soren didn't fall, she would be safe. Just like the time when she encountered the believers of the god of hunting, Soren gave her the same feeling now. But this time it was stronger and hotter. At this moment she couldn't help but tremble. It was an indescribable feeling. She was wet. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.